public comment, budget review, general.
This is Jason Anderson. I am calling a special town council meeting to order. It is currently 8:04 a.m. on Saturday, April 6th, 2024. For roll call purposes, all council members are in attendance, except in person, except for Mr. Whitehead, who is trying to log in remotely at this time. At this point, we will move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is public comment. Anyone who would like to speak, please come up to the podium and state your name and address. And I would just like to quickly add that comments need to be relevant to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, which are the town operation and capital budget.
I'm John LaBelle from 57 Island Road, Dayville, Connecticut. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address this August council. What I've done is, Frank just distributed my chicken scratching on your document that was posted on the website. I'm basically trying to address items of substance. And so on page I, I'd like to emphasize the importance that this body look at the vision for Killingly. Oh, am I limited in time? I won't take a lot of time.
Normally, it's 5 minutes, but if
Okay.
council members made a motion to amend the rules for further discussion, that would be allowable. Okay. Motion has been made by Ms. Barclay, seconded by Mr. Gambatista, to allow for an extension of the 5-minute limit on the content, on comments. All those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well,
The statements in here reflect those hardworking issues that the town manager has put together. And I'm just kind of wondering where the council chairman makes a statement. To me, as a taxpayer, it's important that I hear from the chairman. In terms of community development, this document to me represents an action plan as part of the community development, and it follows fairly well the objectives of the plan of development, etc. There are a lot of numbers in here. I pulled this up pulled it down from the internet last night, and so therefore it's handwritten notes, and I thought it was important that I had something to give to you. One of the issues that I think is important, as I've mentioned before, is the setup here in this room and the ability for the public to hear people speak and tell who's speaking, and a microphone system that allows that to happen. That's, to me, very important from a transparency point of view. I recently was elected chairman of the Democratic Town Committee, and I just want to make it clear I'm here as a citizen, not as chairman of the committee. But the comments that I'm about to make here as chairman of the Democratic Town Committee, I'm willing to put forward and help with any contacts that I might have in state and national government to further benefit this community, be it communications or, as important, money to support this community. the vision, and I'm willing to serve on the vision committee as well, okay? The plan of development says it's developed about every 10 years, and I think it's important that it's actually renewed every 5 years. The Prim plant has been sitting there as a ugly manifestation of a welcome to this community of people who come in via that route. I think it's important that, and I know people have been working on it, but how about we put some teeth into the negotiations? I think that property is valued as about $50,000. There's about 120 acres there, and I have a vision for that property, and similar to the Riverwalk in Austin, Texas, where you have a walkway, different versions of walkway, boating, fishing, family activities, etc. More as what would quickly I would describe as an extension of Bell Park, but a much bigger version of it, and very well thought out, so that, you know, with the population of our community being at the age that it is, my hair's not white, but it could be, something that is attractive for the local community, and I'm willing to share the complete ideas that I have. And the mills that, you know, one of them recently burned down, which was built by a industrialist from France, and, you know, improving the living conditions for people in the community. There isn't much blight in Killenly, but what there is, I think, needs to be addressed. And I'm willing to help with the Department of Economic Development to the extent that I can, and helping to bring money into the community for the activities that are described in here in some detail. And I have a vision for Main Street, Danielson, and you're entitled to laugh when I say this. Move Route 12. Move Route 12. And allow that street to be used as a streetscape like we have in some communities. And I reference in Las Vegas the Fremont Street experience, for those of you that are familiar with it. And if you're not, go online and check it out. There's an opportunity there to create a dynamic for Killingley. If you can move Route 12 and have the ability to close that street off on the occasions when you want to have performances or vendors, or I know you once in a while you used to do it when the motorcycles came to town, but it was only partially closed off. So those are a couple of visions. I go to page A5. I know you're in the process of dealing with Lake Road. I'm of the opinion that they need to pay their fair share. And I know a lot of other people, including most of you, probably share that opinion. On page A6, sorry, I'm functioning on about 1 hour's sleep. The Parks and Grounds proposed budget reflects an increase of $66,000, et cetera, et cetera. I think it needs to be more. And, you know, we have the beautiful Bell Park, and the improvements that are proposed to that park are great. And oh, by the way, I was in a meeting where they talked about the little mud puddle that the toddlers would create. Well, I encourage you to keep it, because they make it, and that's where they go. It's not an accident. I've had my grandchildren there one day, and it's an attraction. But anyways, the cost of an additional, I think, enforcement person for $122,000. How does that compare to a state police person? It's probably more, but I just make a note asking that question. I don't expect an answer right now. What does this mill rate mean? I just underline that. it's a question, and I didn't answer it for myself. On page A7, consequence of exceeding the cap, I'd like to understand what that means. The state is using the rate of 6.27%, and so we have I don't understand that whole paragraph, so I'm looking to try to understand it. And if you want to come back to that later, that's fine. Let's see, conclusion, the town's elected officials are charged with setting the course of the town, and those officials must consider and adjust the plan of development. And if you look at the beginning, I read that last night, and it talks about the Native American heritage here in the community, and how important it is to the community. And the farm I grew up on, we used to find arrowheads in the brook. And so, you know, there's a lot of history and background here that goes back to the time when the entire area was settled by Native Americans, different tribes. But and I have, in my career, worked for 5 different Native American tribes. They're all the same, except different, but they're all the same. And all the projects that they build as casinos are jobs, all about jobs. But going back to the first couple pages of the plan of development really is an education on the history. It's not complete there, but it's a very interesting study on how this community became what it is in terms of how it got divided up with other communities along the way. The other thing that I feel fairly strongly about is, in this community, we have a planning and zoning commission. I feel that planning and zoning enforcement are 2 different functions. It's like the police writing the laws and then enforcing them. And I served for a number of years in Putnam on the planning commission, as chairman of the commission for a while, and also chairman of the development of a plan of development. And to me, I wonder how we got to the point, and it's state statute, you're allowed to do it, where you have the combination of the 2. But at times I see there's a conflict between what's in the plan of development and the zoning regulations, the enforcement of the zoning and regulations, and what I would call sometimes spot zoning. And to me, that's a conflict. We're not going to probably change that. I just, when I go to meetings, I try to be aware of the differences in what the plan is versus what the enforcement is. And every once in a while, I get up and say something. The page E3. To me, you know, the Killenly has a good infrastructure, and one day I started overlaying the sewer map and the zoning map, and it's interesting when you lay those 2 on top of one another, what you see in terms of the density map shown by the zoning versus where the sewer is, and then of course there's water on a more limited basis, and the 2 kind of tie together. And so when I go to a zoning meeting, I'm looking at the 2 and how they tie together. And I think the density is established by the zoning as it is now, is consistent with good planning, and I would not want to see much of it changed, except on a big overall point of view. Then I have actually one financial question. On the
Point of
funding.
order, Chair.
I'm sorry.
Mr. LaBelle.
Yeah.
No disrespect. This is supposed to be we've taken 20 minutes now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just believe our chair should direct the conversation to Mary's presentation. And most of your questions will probably be answered. But we were here this morning to hear Mary's presentation for the government, and we're talking more about the POCD and zoning and how it all goes together, and that's great. And we're always very happy to have you come and speak, but this is the time for the budget.
So I'll ask one budget question then.
Okay.
I respect what you're saying, and I'm
So
sorry.
I apologize, but I would
No,
expect our
no,
chair.
no apology necessary. I've imposed myself on your time, and I apologize for that. On page E3, we have the general fund contribution that goes across various capital issues. And I would encourage you to look at overall carrying that forward and keeping that. And I know that impacts the final mill rate. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your patience, and I apologize for taking so long.
No, Mr. LaBelle, what I was going to say, when we have the next SEDS meeting with NECOG, I encourage you to come. I think your input is fantastic, and I think you would be an excellent resource for that team. I think the next meeting you should join us.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I'm sorry I didn't realize I was taking so long.
Nope, that's okay.
But I would encourage this council to stay focused on what's best for the community. And nobody in the community has deep pockets, and me included. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I apologize for interrupting.
No, do not apologize. Thank you. And have a good day. I have a 9 o'clock meeting I have to go to, so I'll have to run out. Sorry.
Frank Alleman, 30 Sawmill Road. I only have one question. Got a very nice sheet just handed out comparing when you drop it by 4.5 mils, okay? And my only question there is, if you subtract 21.2 from 26.88, it's a 5.6 mil decrease. So I'm not sure where the 4.5 comes in. That's my only question.
That was a new sheet that I handed out this morning, and that was really to reflect what the revaluation specifically does to the mill rate and how the revaluation may be impacting individual property tax calculations. If you only looked at revaluation impact, no additional budgetary changes from current fiscal year to next fiscal year. So we were going to go over that spreadsheet.
Thank you. And just to address Mr. George's comments, the reason why I hadn't redirected Mr. LaBelle's comments were basically everything he stated can be tied to the budget. Where we're spending our money should be based on POCD. All his comments, while they may not have been financial comments, were everything involved in a town. This is our operating budget. Our operating budget covers pretty much everything he discussed. So that's why, in my mind, I didn't see a need for calling for a point of order.
And I appreciate that.
Any further public comments? Seeing none, we'll now move on in the agenda. Ms. Gloria, can you take it over from here?
Good morning, everyone. So we are going to take the opportunity this morning to really go page by page through the budget book. I'm going to start and just highlight certain areas within my initial budget message. So this is the town manager's budget that is presented to you in accordance with charter. The town council's process from here is after Thursday nights, this upcoming Thursday night's public hearing. The following week, you'll be meeting to deliberate and really create the town council's budget. The town council's budget is what goes to the annual town meeting for the townspeople to consider, and then ultimately, the final conclusion of that annual town meeting is what goes to referendum. So this is really kind of the first step on the town side of the budget for presentation to you, and it is considered the town manager's budget, which is why the message is drafted by myself, because this is my correspondence to you as the town council. The first kind of numbers page we get to is A3. This has a little bit of a different breakdown than what you have typically seen in the past. In the past, we've typically only reflected general government and Board of Education and their relative impacts on mill rate. Given the, more recently, given the substantial financial commitment that the town council has made in road renewal, that was kind of getting lost, or for me, it was clouded in the general government side of the presentation. So I decided to break out capital improvement investment for that was being fund balance was being utilized for the council to more clearly see that and its direct relationship on mill rate. So if we're looking at this budget, the town operations, and that is all of the town functions that we're going to go over. So basically all of the D pages, except for human services subsidies, because those are outside agencies. The town operations, we're seeing a collective increase of 134,000 and change, just over 1%. The human services subsidy requests, so these are our outside agencies that are requesting funding from the town. And those come to you as they are received by my office. So I make no deliberation on those. Those are passed directly forward to you. You all received a binder with all of those requests in them outlining, and it's exactly everything that we received from those agencies for your consideration. That increase is just over $183,000, which actually is a 25% increase. And in that number, there are three more significant increases among those human services subsidies. One being you have a new request from UCFS for funding. They've never been funded by the town previously. They will be attending your Tuesday night meeting for a presentation on their request. KB Ambulance is requesting an additional $60,000 for ambulance services. They are also going to be coming to your Tuesday night meeting, this upcoming Tuesday night meeting, for a presentation on their request as well, because they are substantial changes. The other more substantial change within that is related to the paramedic intercept service. And we can go over that in more detail when we get to the page. But in essence, the town is part of the regional contract for paramedic intercept services through NECOG. That cost has increased by the contract, but there's two folds of that increase. One is the cost increase, and one is the call volume. So as call volume increases, our cost increase. And so we are basing that increase is an estimation based on the contract cost that has been entered into by that regional paramedic intercept program that we are a part of. And second, by the historical trend of call volume that we're seeing, and the increase in call volume that we're seeing. So those are really the three major components of that human services subsidy increase. Solid waste, as you know, that is a decrease that was presented to you previously. The solid waste subcommittee had recommended a reduction in the in the general government subsidy to that subsidiary fund, and they're making up the difference with increases in user rates within that in order to be able to balance that within that budget. We will get eventually to that budget as well. Debt service has an increase of $802,000, and that is predominantly related to the new issuance that we're getting ready to issue in the next month for the Westfield Avenue project. We were fortunate in that as I relayed to you previously, the KMS project, the state, we hadn't been receiving any state reimbursements on that project, so the town had been cash flowing that. And we were starting to run into critical path with regards to cash flow. And we were possibly looking at an additional $10 million short-term note for cash flow purposes. I was able to speak with the commissioner that oversees that division and explain the critical nature of this to us. That would have had a $700,000 cost impact to this budget. She was incredibly responsive. We have received pretty substantial payments from the state on that KMS reimbursement, so we do not have to proceed forward with that note issuance. So we are only having to incur the cost of the actual borrowing, the long-term borrowing that we were looking at initially. So that was very successful in those conversations. Lastly, on that section is the due to student transportation CNR, and that is, again, the CNR account or the capital non-recurring account. This is where we hold the depreciation value for all of our student transportation. That is based on what vehicles they have in there, the life expectancy of those vehicles, and the values of those vehicles individually by VIN, and it comes to a calculation. There is an overall reduction in the need for funding of that. I outlined the revenues. We'll go in more detail around what is driving the increase in those revenues. And then with regards to the Lake Road generating funding, that has typically been allocated as a separate allocation for town and Board of Education. I treated that allocation for general government calculation purposes and Board of Education purposes to be the exact same as the previous year. As we all know, that assessment is currently in tax appeal. So I have held the same value in our grand list. That is what I consider the undisputed value based on what they have submitted for their tax appeal of a payment of about 3.1 million. Anything that we have that the grand list, that the mill rate would generate above that in tax calculation, we are reflecting as a contribution essentially into capital projects. That is also being reserved until the final disposition of that tax appeal or the ultimate agreement on a tax stabilization agreement. So we have not designated an expenditure for those remaining capital funds largely because we know that this is still a disputed item. So we are not impacting mill rate for that.
Question on that,
Sure.
Mary. So last year's, we did similar, you got the 3.996 allocated for capital, and we didn't use all.
No, we did not. That's actually sitting in a reserve because we know that it's disputed. Right, it's in litigation, it's disputed. So we did not allocate all of that to capital projects. We did transfer it to the capital project fund. However, we have a reserve around it. So basically, we're acknowledging that it's not expendable at this point in time. And the same thing for the current year. So the change, the impact of what a lower mill rate would mean is reflected in the capital portion and not in the general government side of the budget. So capital projects, this is reflecting, in the current year, the town council supported road renewal, the pavement management plan, as well as the library roof, and the continuation of the storm drainage study that occurred. And then we're showing the allocation for Lake Road generating. In the upcoming year, I have reflected, as the highway director had presented to you a couple of months ago, the road renewal at 3.2 million. This is the accelerated plan. And as far as general fund contribution, you'll note that there's actually a decrease in the overall general fund contribution towards capital projects of $1.2 million. That was taking into consideration that in general, when the town has a dedicated general government fund contribution, we usually start trying to step it down in the subsequent years, especially as we are, just trying to balance out what our fund balance percentage is going to be, what's available in fund balance. What I offer to you today is that we will look at the fund balance calculation, but this amount, if the town council so chooses, you could increase the general fund contribution from general fund balance to offsetting the remaining portion of that investment in capital projects and not have any significant impact on our fund balance percentage. And I can further walk through with you how we've calculated that and the conservative nature in which we're forecasting that fund balance to be at. So I think the council would be in a good position for that. That would have, if the council decided to increase that fund balance contribution, that would decrease the mill rate proposal by 0.69 mils. So, as the highway director, as we had discussed when the highway director had presented, this is the same investment. We were still talking about overall over a 4-year period, still a $10 million investment in roads. His proposal was to move some of that to a more current year and then drop it off as we proceed over the next 4 years. That provides the council and the town with some flexibility with regards to where you are with fund balance. So we know where our fund balance level is right now. We know that accelerated use of that $10 million is not going to have a substantial impact on our current fund balance level, which the finance director and I are highly sensitive to that as we're getting ready to go into a credit rating call later on this week. We want to make sure that our credit agencies do not all of a sudden start getting concerned around fund balance utilization. We have developed the fund balance forecast based on zero turnback from the Board of Education. We've heard from the Board of Education that they expect very minimal turnback in the current fiscal year and very minimal going forward. So we have accounted for that. And even with that accounting for expecting no additional turnback from the Board of Education and just really turnbacks from our trends of revenues and what little the town side turns back, there is still the capability for the town to continue to make that road pavement investment over the course of the next 4 years. But by front loading, if a year or two from now you decide that fund balance, you're a little uncomfortable with that, it's easier to scale back on that. And you've been able to accomplish some of those heavier road renewals while we know where our current pavement prices are and while we know where our current fund balance is. So I just offer that to you as a consideration as you're going through this. The next section really speaks to the Board of Education. It reflects the budget that was presented to you by the Board of Education, and it identifies the revenues that are associated directly with education. That's their tuitions and things like that. So ultimately, this calculates to a mill rate of 22.37, which is a decrease of 4.51. We're going to get into with regards to the revaluation. So the town has just recently gone through for October 1st of 2023, a revaluation, which means all of the properties in town were valued based on current market value. That means that everybody's rates, everybody's assessed values have changed, increased or decreased based on that market value application. So I will bring you to the page that I handed out. This is speaking strictly just to revaluation. So when we look at a year that we have a revaluation, my first question that I always have is, what is that revaluation, what is that grand list impact by itself to the mill rate? So if nothing changed out of the current fiscal year for expenditures or revenues that were currently appropriated, and we were to take the new grand list number and plug that into the formula, what does that give us for a mill rate? And when we do that, it brings it to a mill rate of 21.2, which is actually a decrease of 5.68 mils. Okay, that's the actual decrease, is 5.68 mils. So I know that anything above that is really a tax increase based on what was currently appropriated for revenue and expenditures in the current fiscal year. So normally I would give you an example of what does this mill rate mean to me, right? And I would give you, a property that is valued at $100,000, $150,000, $200,000, $250,000, maybe $300,000, and say, here, this is what a decrease of 4.51 mils means to them. That doesn't work this year because everybody's value changed differently. Right? So it is very individualized this time. There's no way to blanket statement and say everybody has an increase of X amount of money, right? Or X percentage based on this 21.2 mill rate calculation because everybody's property value changed. So what I gave you is a sampling, right? The top part is residential homes. And I just literally, I opened up the GIS map and I grabbed parcels and said, okay, so this is not attributable to any individual. I literally just grabbed parcels and said, this is what the new property card valuation is. And I went to their tax bill that they got for the current year and said, this is what their assessed value was in the current year. And I did the calculations. And so as you can see, there are some on the residential side that actually at 21.2 mils has a decrease. Small decreases, but decreases. Others, it ranges. That goes, smaller increases to larger increases. And I am sure that there are property values out there that are a higher increase than even this that I'm reflecting here, right? Again, it depends on how much. So the first part is showing you what their current taxes are in the current fiscal year. The percentage of property value, that is the percentage that property assessment increased from October 1st of 2022 to October 1st of 2023. That's the revaluation impact, right? So that's the percentage that their gross assessments changed. The next one is recalculating that property based on what we refer to as the equalized mill rate. So that's the mill rate that if nothing else changed from revenue and expenditure, and we plugged in the new grand list on the existing current year budget, that would be what the mill rate would be. And then calculating what the annual tax would be based on that mill rate, and then recognizing that difference. I know that there's been concern that there is a huge shift, or a significant shift from from commercial industrial to residential. So I wanted to show, and I apologize, I do have those percentage numbers. Jason, I know you asked me for that, and they just clicked there. I printed them off. They're in my office. So I can grab that even if we have a break. I can grab that for you. But I wanted to show a sampling of what that means, because even those percentages don't really speak to what is the actual impact of commercial industrial taxes. So I took commercial industrial property, right? I took some small businesses like J Garden, and I took some big businesses and big industrial in our industrial park. And I laid them out and said, what would 21.2 mils mean to those industries? And as you can see, some have a decrease and others have an increase, right? So they are experiencing very similar to our residential, but on different scale, because obviously they're commercial industrial, right? So it's just to basically recognize that, as we go through this process, I will remind taxpayers and remind our residents and our businesses that they should be looking up that tax calculation for themselves, as they're making the decisions around what their opinions are, around what ultimately comes to them from the council, for that calculation, just because your neighbors or your friends' taxes increase by a certain percentage or a certain amount, does not mean that that's the same for you. And everyone needs to do that individual calculation to really understand the proposal that's before the town council and ultimately what the council's proposal is going to be to the taxpayers, so they can make an informed decision on that. So that's really what I'm showing here on this, and I will be bringing that to the public hearing to really kind of go over that at the public hearing. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Yeah, how do you explain, like you said, everything is different.
Right.
A few people have talked to me, and they don't really understand, but our taxes are gonna go up, and you try to explain, well, if nothing happened.
It may or it may not, right?
And
That's tough.
if you can come and listen to this a couple of times, it takes a while to, even, I'm trying to figure it, and it's still, I've been in this a number of times.
Yeah.
And it sort of doesn't, it makes sense and it sort of doesn't make sense, and the public is just even farther out on that.
Yeah, and what I always try and equate the revaluation to is really that bell curve, right? Some properties didn't increase that much, and so they are on the lower part of that bell curve. Then you get up to the median of where those increases are, and there's a median. And then some properties increased, a lot more. We know that on the residential side, the type of property that increased pretty substantially is raised ranches. 3-bedroom raised ranches increased a lot this last cycle. That's not something that we have seen in previous revaluations. That specific property style didn't have as dramatic of an increase. But 3-bedroom raised ranches really had a pretty substantial increase this time around. So it depends. Every property is unique. We all buy our properties because they're unique, right? You can look at 100 raised ranches and decide that, one is the one that speaks best to you, right? But every property is unique, and every valuation is unique to that property. So you really have to look up what is this budget actual impact to your individual property. So again, it all kind of, it spans. And, we only do revaluation every 5 years, right? So we don't have this conversation every year, which is why I think it's a little harder to get through the density of it, because we're only doing it once every 5 years. And so that kind of does make it harder. Yeah.
When I'm looking at the line, the difference on the top, residential homes,
Yeah.
that number, if I'm understanding, it represents the either reduction or increased dollar value for the calendar year under this proposed budget. Is that accurate?
No, so that percentage is
Not percentage,
Oh.
the number, the difference.
the difference, yes. So that is the fiscal year change in property tax cost.
Correct. So
Yes.
So
Increase or
we're
decrease.
saying, we'll just take the first one. We're saying that, again, I know there's not many houses that are 106,000 anymore. You're saying they'd have a reduction of $357.
With the equalized mill rate, not what's being presented to you, because what's being presented to you is 22.37.
Okay.
This is just to reflect what the revaluation of the property values did to the taxes.
So you did this at 21.2, but you're saying it's actually 22?
So depending on what you ultimately determine is the value that's gonna go to the taxpayers,
Yep.
what I have presented to you is a mill rate, what the town manager and the Board of Education has presented to you accumulates to a 22.37 mill rate. This is only, what I try specifically to do in a revaluation year is to really articulate what the impact is from revaluation only. No additional proposals, no additional ads. So you know that anything above that 21.2
Yep.
is just more taxes. It's gonna increase those numbers. That's what it is.
That's fair. So I just look at this, I think people like to know, again, I'm just learning, so I'm asking maybe some real dumb questions. Is
Your
when
question is
I
a
look
no.
at this bottom layout, no one wants an increase. But if I can explain to someone on a house that's worth, $267,000, you know, they're getting a negative. I mean, when I look at this, I break that number down by month of what it is, and only in the 549, you know, $550,000 house range, you're getting an increase about $95 a month. But a lot of these others are $15 or $20 a month. And I know nobody wants it, but if it's
Right.
gonna get us what we need to run the town, at least it's a good way to explain, you're paying for 4 cups of coffee to get this in a month.
Yeah, this is based on
Yeah,
our
this is-
current year's,
Current year.
yes, not what the proposed budget is.
Right.
So any increase from our current year to what's being presented right now and we'll be deliberating on would be additional on top of these increases that are in here.
And I think that's the most transparent way to do it, when we come up with that.
Yeah.
Relaying what we think the averages of all this, and what someone's gonna pay
Yes.
extra per month.
Right.
Yeah.
Is a very common sense way for
Yeah.
everyone to look at it and say, this is what we're asking you to pay on
Yep.
this budget.
And that's usually what I present to the town council is this is what it is on an annual basis, and then I give like a monthly impact, because many people are escrowed. This is just trying to really capture what that, and the difference in properties. It's very difficult on a revaluation year to say, everybody that's in the $500,000 value of property, this is what your increase is going to be, or this is how that impact was, because it's not the same for every property at 500,000. You may talk to somebody that has a property value of 500,000 that is going to have an increase around this. You may talk to them, and after you look at what their prior value was and what their new value is, they may have a substantially less or a substantially more. It really depends on how much that change occurred. Right? So this is just really to kind of show that sampling of, it's important for everyone to look at what their previous value was, what their new value is, and do that calculation between them.
So, just on the years and when it hits, just on the years and when it hits, and I am escrowed. Mine always pays like super late, and I don't know why. I'm like, why does that say that? But, tell me again about the years, because when I look at this, I can see where my house would lay on this.
Okay,
But actually, before the assessment, it would land a column to the left.
sure.
You know what I mean? So,
So what you really should, if you recall what your property value was on 10/1, right, of 2022, right? And I don't know if your house is even representative on here, but you would look at what is the new value. So, for example, the $181,000 a valued house at 10/1 of 2022. That one came through revaluation with a new assessment, gross assessment of $244,000. That was a almost 35% increase on that property, right? So then we do the calculation of what is just the revaluation impact, and that provides a yearly increase in tax of $217, or a 6% increase, right?
no, so I see that, but when we explain it, what I'm saying is, so I can see where my house lies. And all of that is very clear what you're saying, but it doesn't really show the true increase, because my house before lied a column to the left.
Right, so this isn't meant to be a column where you can put people in buckets. This is meant to be a pure sampling and a demonstration of you can't put people in buckets. Everybody has to look up their own. You can't give this to somebody and say, here, find your bucket, right?
No, but I mean, explaining to, he wants to say, how do
Right.
you explain it?
When,
You're gonna pick out where if we just pick out here and then we go to 21 Mills, oh, it's a decrease. But if I was comparing it to the one on the
you can't.
to the left, to explain
Yeah.
to them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
then it's gonna be actually an increase.
I totally understand. See, I think what I see out of this clearly is, it doesn't help any of us that our houses are worth a lot more because we're not selling them.
Right.
Right.
But when you look across this column, I mean, your home at 181 is worth 35% more. I mean, that's in 1 year. At 163, 38, 15, and then when you go to the highest, which are people, I think, moving from out of state, maybe get that 550 range, it's 48%. I mean, that's wild. You know, it doesn't mean to them that they want to pay more, but their house is worth significantly more. But it doesn't, you know, a house to me, it really isn't an asset because you don't sell it.
Yeah.
It's only an asset when you sell it.
And recognize that your 10/1 of 2022 value was actually set 5 years before,
Oh,
Yeah.
right? So we only do this every 5 years, which is why you see,
17.
it was really 5 years ago. It was October 1 of 2018 was the last revaluation. So this is the first time they are being adjusted in 5 years, which is why it's challenging, because we only have this conversation every 5 years, right? So it's really that change over 5 years, which does provide, I think, a little bit more, it does add a little bit more sticker shock value.
So we won't do this again until 28.
Right, we got 5 years now before we have to do this again.
Okay.
Yep. So we're not gonna do this every year. Thank God for that. I'll
No,
just
but-
say that right
but
now.
at least you can take those numbers and easily, the 34, 35, you gain 7% a year for 5 years. Your house is going up 7% every year for 5 years, which is still a high number for value.
Well, like what she's saying though, this is a sample of certain
Yeah.
properties.
Yeah.
Your own, why did one go down and some went up? We gotta try to explain that away too. So the thing is, you have to look at your own assessment and then plug in the 21 mills, and then you can see, then you could do this comparison. But nobody, it's difficult. but-
It is challenging.
So, but that's what you have to physically, this is not, you can't say, oh, I'm gonna pick between, my house is between here. You can't do that.
Mhm.
Cause it doesn't work, cause the assessments just didn't go 20%.
Right.
If it went across the board, the assessments were across the board, almost equal, you could do that, but right, they're all over the place. So and that's why I guess they've been busy with the Board of Assessment Appeals.
Correct.
One thing I would like to see on a town website is on the homepage, a link on, and have a link to a separate page, and the link being how to calculate what your new taxes will be, and have a second page that explains the process, has a link to, this is the page you go to find your assessment.
Sure.
Once you find your assessment, this is our current mill rate, this is the proposed mill rate with the Board of Ed and town budget as brought to the council, and then once we deliberate and come up with a figure, have that number there as well, and then once it goes past town meeting, whatever comes out of that, have those on there, so it's easy for somebody to go on the homepage, click on a link, it brings you to another page that explains how to do it, and every spot you gotta go for information, there's a link to bring it there. That way, it's not going on a website and trying to figure out where this information is on your own. I think that would help out a lot.
Sure, so we do have a tax calculator page that we have on our website. We've used that for a number of years. We can add some additional links to that. We do already have links embedded in that of, here's your property card, that kind of thing. We do fill in the mill rate, this is the current year mill rate, and then it gives you an option to be able to change, so that way when people are, contemplating what they may be comfortable with for a mill rate, they can kind of put that in without having to do the true calculation of what the mill rate actually is, right? Because I know many times when I first started here in municipal, I always missed a zero in that calculation, and I would have a heart attack every time I hit the equals button, right? Because it was like, there's no way that is that. But so it does that for you. So that way it helps kind of remove some of that. You just got to plug in what is being shown on the page. So that is going to be on Monday. That'll be on the very front page of our website with a link to the budget, with links to the property cards, with all of that information in there, so that way people can do those calculations on their own. They can find that. I'll also add a link. We haven't done this in the past, but I will add a link to getting to, it's gonna say, essentially, it's gonna look like you're paying your taxes. You don't have to go, you click the button, it is for getting to what your current tax bill is. Doesn't force you, you're not actually having to make a payment, but it does allow you to look up what your current tax bill is, what your previous tax bills have been. Those that are in the borough will need to make sure that they look at how much is just the town cost, because if they look at what their total bill is, that's gonna include the borough, which is a completely separate entity as far as that calculation. So they need to look at just what their town tax cost is, right? So we will have all of those in there. So we've used that tax calculator. Actually, I know people in other towns that use our tax calculator for their own town mill rate calculations because it's universal like that. Like you can plug in any mill rate and it works. So I've had people from other towns call me and say, hey, can you make sure that's on the front page because it's easier to find? Whatever, that's fine. It's all budget season. We all got to get through budget.
I've done it.
Yeah. So, I will, is everybody good at this point? I can move through? Okay. So I'm on A4, of the budget book. And, I already kind of highlighted a lot of this. So the education budget, you've received that presentation, general government budgets. I kind of went through this highlight, previously. So if we go to A5, we covered, I really reviewed with you that capital projects, what the town had funded in the current fiscal year, and what the potential funding would be, in the next year. Again, I leave it to the council for your consideration as to whether or not you want to increase the utilization of fund balance towards those capital projects. That historically has been viewed very positively by our credit rating agencies, that the town is investing in capital projects, not just utilizing the fund balance to offset operational costs, but rather using it specifically for targeted capital projects. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely a little confused because I thought if it was a capital project separate from operating costs, that it was outside the mill rate, and that's why we did that.
So the only time, so it can be outside the mill rate. However, the town can build capital projects into the mill rate. You decide to utilize less of fund balance, which means it's being funded by mill rate if there's no other sources of funding. So in this budget, it assumes that there is 0.69 of a mill rate increase to cover those capital projects. Again, I leave that to the town council to say, we're okay with increasing that $2 million fund balance utilization to a higher level because we know we're sinking it to capital project and alleviating that out of the mill rate, right? Okay. So when we go through, subsequently we then look at the revenue section, we will go through all of these fully in detail, but I did review again with regards to the Lake Road generating and the impact of that and how I'm dealing with that within the budget, just like I explained a few minutes ago.
Well, getting back to Lake Road, that's another issue that everybody just hounds me on. And now we're in tax litigation on top of it.
Right, which is why I've been purposeful in only putting into the operating budget to offset mill rate what we consider to be the undisputed amount. Anything above that, we have attributed to capital projects, which would be a future allocation, because that is set aside and reserved on an accounting basis. Our auditors would probably yell at us if we just said, we're going to expend that all in the operating budget. Our credit rating agency would have something to say about that because it is a disputed item. And so we can articulate that it is actually held in reserve. Even though they have paid the full balance from the current fiscal year, it is still held in reserve. So that way, once either the tax agreement or the tax appeals are settled, and we come to a final number, we will then know how much is actually available, and the council and the townspeople would potentially make determinations around capital project investment with that money or other investment with that money at that point in time. But it is required to be held in reserve. So we are only using in the general government revenue, in the general fund revenue, to offset mill rate, the undisputed amount. So we're keeping it at 3.1 million. Does that make sense? That is what's reflected on A3. And that is the 3.1 million. It's in under capital projects allocation. That's 3.1 million for the upcoming year.
No, what is the disputed amount for the power plant?
Oh, yeah, what they say.
That's the tax value.
That's the whole amount?
That's the tax value of the disputed amount.
Okay.
Okay?
And wasn't it when we had this, wasn't it, we were saying 400, and what was their report saying?
So that's that is in negotiations at this point in time, and I can't disclose.
Oh, okay.
That's in contract negotiations at this time. Sure.
Okay, so couldn't I just clarify on this so I understand what's going on, Mary? You have worked into the budget, part of the mill rate, library roof,
So that's what's in the
highway maintenance budget, to the tune of 3.194, is that, or just, so I'm
So-
just a little bit confused about where is that .69 exactly on here?
So the current year, the library roof was in the current year, as well as 2.5 for the, 2.2. Anyway, for the 2.2, for the road renewal. Going into the upcoming year, the only proposal for capital investment is the road renewal, and that's at $3,250,000. So that's the increase of, that's the, let me make sure I'm looking at it. So that's an increase that's the increase from the 2.5 to the 2 million, to the $3,250,000. That is for that road renewal. That's where we're looking at increasing that, that capital investment. On the revenue side, for the utilization of fund balance, because you had funded the library roof and that $50,000 for the study, and we were reducing a little bit more from the pavement management. That's where we dropped the fund balance request down to the $2 million. So you can increase it back up.
No, so just that will be clear on the future
Yeah.
capital plan. All
Yeah.
right.
Sorry. On the expenditures, so recreation. So one of the things that you're going to see within this budget, so I want to kind of peel back to, how did we build this budget on an expenditure and revenue basis? On the town side, we really take an approach every year that our departments start meeting with me in February to review every single line item within their budget. We really approach it pretty close to a zero-based budgeting on almost all of our lines. Every line, they have to substantiate what it is, what do we need to buy? What do we need to subscribe to? What do we need to do for training? What are our estimated costs around that for literally everything? What we do is we look at those, and then if the department head is telling me, I anticipate, and I'm just going to use professional development as an example because it's probably one of the easier examples to give, but they explain to me that they plan on attending X number of trainings or attend do X number of certifications. And they've told me that they used that same explanation in the previous year, but I see that they haven't been expending that. They haven't actually been doing that. That's when I apply historical trends, right? I can look at them and say, okay, but you've told me that last year. We budgeted for it last year, and that didn't happen. So we need to make a difference. We need to make a change, right? So we look at historical trends on that as well. Some of the other areas that we look at historical trends is with like regards to paper. We have seen a substantial increase in the cost of paper. Even though, we shop that around, I will say our finance staff that shops this, they are incredibly diligent. They look at the pennies on this. If they can find, and we buy it in bulk, if we can find a way to buy that for less money, they're going to do it. But we have seen a pretty substantial increase in paper. That's where historical trend we look at how much we've been expending, the volume of what we've been using for paper, and then project what the new projected cost is going to be for those items. So all of my departments, when they come in, I have a conversation with all of the department heads in January, kind of letting them know expectations. They all know, don't come in with a wish list. Don't come in with pie in the sky. Come in with your details. I scrutinize all of the numbers. Finance, if I miss a number, finance staff will immediately flag it right in front and say, we haven't talked about this one. So we look at every single number. We also look at very detailed all of the revenues that they're estimating. But my conversation with the department staff, I am fortunate that the department staff that we have is incredibly diligent. I have none that would have even considered coming in at pie in the sky. They know that this is taxpayer money. They know that this is the senior person that they're helping in the movies or in the business that is contemplating whether or not to stay in Killingly, right? They get that, and they are incredibly diligent. And I want to congratulate them on that. Incredibly diligent, which is why when we go through the operational costs of this budget, you're going to see where there are decreases because, and that's not necessarily decreases that I have forced upon them, but decreases that they've come to and said, you know what, we found a better way of doing it. And we think we can do it this way, or we've achieved this level of savings, or we have found an alternative training that is less money or no cost at all. They are very cognizant of that. And I truly appreciate every one of them for having that mindset and recognizing that this is not pretend money. This is not play money. This is real hard-earned sweat and tears by people. And they are very truly attuned to that. So I really appreciate that, and I just wanted to say that. So one of the other pressures on this budget is minimum wage, and that largely impacts our library and our community and our recreation and community center. Those two departments, we have a number of staff members that are very close to minimum wage or at minimum wage. Minimum wage increase to 15.69 this January. It will have an automatic change again in January. And guess what? We don't know what the number is. Because it's baked into an inflationary formula for the first time ever. So we don't know what that number is. So we've had to make some assumptions around that, around how it's been trending. But again, without having a lot of historical trend on what that inflationary pressure is going to be, we've had to make some assumptions around that. So that is definitely part of what you're seeing for increases in salary or wage lines in recreation and in library. One of the other components, we obviously have to layer in on the wage lines across the board, any contractual increases that we have. We have 3 unions, 2 of which are settled, 1 we're in negotiation with. So the 2 that are settled, we know how much their union contract salary rates are going to be. We have incorporated that into this budget as we're required to. The unit that we are under negotiation with, the amount that we are contemplating allocating towards those salary increases is incorporated in our contingency. As we have done with we do that with all of the non-union, because the town council has to make that separate determination on non-union wage increases. We usually do that in July or August. That is also housed in contingency. But you will still see as we go through this budget that you're going to see little increases in salary administrative, which is non-union. Why is that? That is because we budget to the day. We calculate exactly how many work days are actually in that fiscal year. And for the fiscal year ending in June 30th of 2025, June 30th lands on a Monday. We have 1 additional day we have to account for because the current year ends on a Sunday. right? So we have one day that we have to make sure that we're accounting for, which is why you're seeing those small little blips through that salary administration. Nobody's getting a raise. You guys haven't approved raises for those non-unions. So there's no raises built into there. That is simply recognizing that we have to budget for the additional day. That's what that's for. Parks and grounds. I've been communicating this to the town council for quite some time. We are continuing to add more recreation space. We are in the process of we're gonna be under construction in the next couple of weeks, in the next month or so, on the expansion of the River Trail for another whole section of the River Trail further south. That requires maintenance. That requires somebody to go through and get the trash barrels and clean up the any limbs to plow it during the wintertime, all of those things. So this proposal that's before you is actually taking one of our seasonal staff that we would only hire for the summer months and converting them to a year-round employee, converting that position to a year-round employee. That will allow for that additional need through those winter months when we have a lot of windstorms. We end up having to deal with a lot of limb damage or, clean up through there, and plowing. We have a lot of our residents use our trails, the River Trail, especially those paved walking paths, throughout the year. They don't stop using it just because it's cold outside. If anything, I think they tend to go there more because it's paved and it is plowed and it's a safe walking area versus where they may not be able to now walk or feel safe walking through their neighborhood because of snow mounds and stuff like that, and they're kind of more out into the road. A lot of people will go to the River Trail. We need to be able to keep that clear. We're extending that. So the proposal that I have before you is to increase that position from a seasonal position to a full year-round position. I already explained minimum wage pressure with regards to the library. Law enforcement, this budget does not reflect an increase in number of staff at all. What is being reflected here that is impacting the increase is a little over $40,000 of this $122,000 increase is directly attributable to the armed security officers, to that program. That is 5 armed security officers. We currently have 4 on board. We're still looking for our 5th, right? So we're still advertising for our 5th, and we're hoping that one will be on board. But that $40,000 is fully offset by Board of Education revenue, right? So that $40,000 is actually built into the Board of Education's budget. So while it's reflected here in law enforcement as part of that $122,000, there is an offsetting revenue for that. The remaining portion of that $122,000, so the remaining, $80,000 of that, is really due to how we budgeted in the current year for law enforcement officers. We know that it takes time to onboard law enforcement. So we did not budget full year salaries for our 8th and our 9th officers because we knew it was going to take time. We just onboarded our 8th officer yesterday. We did his swearing-in ceremony yesterday. So he is on board. We are still trying to recruit for a 9th. It's been taking time. We had thought we were going to be able to get somebody into the academy this last academy cycle that happened. Unfortunately, we ended up with no successful candidates. We are not deterred. We are going to go for that 9th position again, and we are going to try and get an academy slot. Buddy's been very actively working with the LEC, and we've had a number of individuals that have submitted that are interested in going through the process of seeing if they're a candidate. And that is a very long process to get through to determine that the person is actually even eligible to go through the academy. So that takes even more time. So what this does is this budgets our full 8 our 8 staff that we have right now, and the 9th, a portion of the year for the 9th, right? So, and we're recognizing that we want to be flexible, so we're not dedicating that position to be solely a academy position, but also we could accept a lateral. A lateral costs more money, but they come with a substantial amount of law enforcement history, background, and with a young agency like ours, that background has really been critical in being able to develop the processes and enforcement, and really assisting Troop D in their processes as well. Our agency, bless you, our law enforcement crew does a lot of far more in-depth investigation than what just a standard constabulary agency may do. And that's because of their background, because of their years of dedication in law enforcement and their expertise in many of the areas. So they've been able to, Troop D has been able to also allow them to do more substantial investigation for Killingly. Recognize they only work in Killingly. While you may see them outside of Killingly, it's because they are following up on an investigation that is a case in Killingly.
So when we see law enforcement, we're gonna see 8 officers and like half a 9 in the salaries?
3/4 of a 9.
Okay.
About 3/4 of a 9. And we are recognizing that at a lateral position level, because, if we're able to onboard a lateral, it is better, and also onboarding that we may or may not have a candidate for that entry level.
Okay, with the 40,000 for the armed security officer, that's a pass-through, basically, like the Board of Ed is paying for that.
Yes, there's a revenue.
I've been getting some comments, why is the town budget going up so high? When a lot of those, we're getting, it's sort of a pass-through.
Yeah.
And it looks like the town budget is going way up.
Right. And that's why on the law enforcement page, I try and reflect that revenue to show how much the Board of Education is actually funding of that line item, because they are town employees. So we need to reflect them on the town side, because they are town employees, but the town receives payment from the Board of Education for those full services, right? So they do reimburse the town. So we don't want to reflect that expenditure twice. We don't want the Board of Education to show the expenditure and the town to show the expenditure, because then, we're double paying for that, right? So on the general government budget, the Board of Education has the expenditure. Their expenditure actually reflects as a revenue to the town, and then we have the expenditure in our expenditure budget.
But that's, the
It's-
last 2 years, things like that are paid by someone else, but however that goes, but the town budget's increasing.
Yeah.
And it's not, but because we're doing, but when they're looking at it, how come the town budget are so high?
Right.
I thought we're the physical,
Yeah, and that's why the A3 page, I really tried to break out a little bit more to be able to show just town operations and try and, reflect those differences. But any other questions on this page before we kind of start diving into the deep details?
I was just going to make a comment. You can go ahead.
I was going to make a comment in regard to Ed's about the increase in the budget. So a lot of the taxpayers don't understand, for the human service subsidies, like United Services, we're obligated to pay per capita for the youth services. The health department, we have to pay for those increases. We don't have a choice. And just like you explained, the intercept services, so those are huge increases that we have no choice but to pay.
Correct.
I was just going to say, speaking to the armed security officers, last year's budget, there was a huge increase
Was the first
that
year.
showed on the town side. And unfortunately, our previous superintendent at town meeting kept stating, oh, well, the town increase is this much, but that's not the net increase, that's the gross, because you are reimbursing the town for this much. And it was just that the way it was presented last year by the previous superintendent was very confusing.
yeah, right, that was the thing, like, our side went way up, and it's like,
Yeah.
where's it going?
Right.
Even though you say it is just.
And that's why I really tried to also break out, because I think capital projects was also kind of intermingled with that. And it was a little bit more challenging to really see. And so that's why I wanted to kind of break those out more independently, to really see actual operations versus capital investment, and that kind of stuff. So I agree, when you're not familiar with how that process works, it can be confusing initially. So, so we'll continue to
And-
highlight that.
I just have another comment. So that's another good point, that a lot of the taxpayers don't realize that a lot of the bonding has been for KMS and for
Yes.
the administration building for the BOE. So it's not just part of the town, it's,
Yeah,
Right.
debt services a lot of times are
Debt service
school
was big.
buildings. One other thing real quick, Mary, can you just go over the reasons why we have the armed security officers are paid by the town and aren't BOE employees, just in case anybody's listening and wants to know why that is?
Yeah, sure. So when this was initially proposed, the superintendent at the time and I did a fair amount of in-depth research into structuring an armed security officer system, if you will, or, platform. And there were several things. One, the Board of Education, in the state of Connecticut, boards of education are not allowed to purchase the service weapon. They cannot own weapons. And so, there are other areas that have done interesting workarounds around that. But that was very clear, that the Board of Education couldn't actually purchase the weapon and issue it to the employee. They had to do they would have had to look at some other ways around that. Secondly, in talking to our insurance carrier, Kerma, because we already have a law enforcement division, and much of the training that armed security officers are required to go through and required to have for a background is very similar to our existing law enforcement police officers. They recommended that they be part of our law enforcement division. They recommend that to all towns, is that they're part of law enforcement division, because then they have better, they're better aligned with the training demands and needs of that position. Like, they have to be recertified on their service weapon on a regular basis, as do our law enforcements. They have to go through de-escalation training, as does our law enforcement. They have to go through a number of other trainings. Those are just two things, but a number of other trainings that they are required to go through to be in compliance with the state's requirements. And it's very similar to our law enforcement. So by keeping them attached to our law enforcement division, then they are more directly supported by that. And so Kerma highly recommended that they be part of a law enforcement division. And so that's where, in going through this, the town created an MOU with the Board of Education outlining how they were going to be town staff, what that interaction was going to look like with the schools, and the reimbursement requirements to the town for any costs associated with those individuals. So it really looked at that program holistically and really understood what the demands were for that program. The next section of this that I wanted to go over was, and we'll get to what does this mill rate need to be in a minute, the municipal spending cap. So the state put in place, so I'm on A6, the state put in legislation in 2015 that enacted a municipal spending cap plan. And what that does is, the spending cap plan actually penalizes municipalities that have expenditures that exceed 2.5% from the previous year, or from the current year. And they did allow, thankfully, for an inflation rate, right? So it's either 2.5 or the inflation rate. Thank God they put that in there, right? Because 2.5 would not get us very far. And so this year, that rate cap is actually 6.27%. So we do the calculation. Some of the costs in this municipal spending plan cap calculation are excluded. Capital investment is excluded. Debt service is excluded. Special education cost is excluded. So we have to go through an entire calculation to get down to what is the actual percentage increase. So know that the percentage increase we reflect on here will never tie to the rest of the budget because portions of these are excluded for that state calculation. So if the town were to exceed this spending cap of 6.27%, what's the consequence? The town of Killingly has been largely held harmless from this because we're considered a distressed municipality. However, in fiscal year 25, we will no longer be considered a distressed municipality because we have been 5 years without having that designation at the state. And so once we came off the distressed municipality designation list, we had 5 years to still utilize the same benefits as a distressed municipality, even though we were not an actual distressed municipality. So the last year we were on was FY 2018. So 2025, we come off. What happens? If we exceed that cap in the budget, if our budget exceeds that cap of 6.27, the reduction, we would get a reduction of 50 cents of every dollar on the municipal sharing grants, which can be very substantial, right? So that's why we're cognizant. We've been doing this calculation all along, even though Killingly has been exempt from that conversation. But 2025 is our first year that we that we could have gotten impacted by it. The budget that's presented to you before you right now has a spending cap formula impact of 2.46. So we are nowhere near the cap, so we don't have to be concerned with that. But I always want to make sure we're communicating that calculation to the council so you know if you're close to or over or well below that calculation.
I have one quick question. When is, as far as the distressed municipalities, when is that calculated for the 25 fiscal year? Is that already done, or does that get done at some point between now
I
and the beginning?
believe that the distressed municipality list comes out towards the end of the summer.
Okay.
And, we haven't been on it the last number of years. If it's possible that we could pop onto it, but absent the town coming back onto that distressed municipality list, and we would then no longer be eligible for to claim any of those benefits. And I will say, the calculation or the identification as a distressed municipality has a number of factors that it looks at. Average income, average property value, unemployment rate, and so the indicators that we're seeing right now is not that we would end up coming back on the distressed municipality list.
Even with the loss of the jobs from Walgreens?
Yeah, that's not a significant change.
Okay.
And the unemployment rate, we're not seeing an increase. Granted, they haven't closed as of yet, but there's been a lot of very active recruitment. So it's very possible that there's going to be a fair amount of absorption because we do have a lot of open positions right now. So that could be, we're hoping for a lot of absorption of that loss. So we're watching it very closely, but I don't know how significant of an impact that will be on our overall unemployment rate. So I always try and take the conservative approach on this and assume that we're not going to have the benefit, so that way we can be mindful in preparing that. But in this budget that's presented to you right now, we're nowhere near that cap. So there's not necessarily a concern around running into that.
I have a question or a comment rather with the state still wanting to push getting rid of the motor vehicle taxes and increasing the tax rate to 90% of assessed value, and with the cap of 2.5%, have they looked at, will that actually be able to be reflected, or will that pull municipalities into the, increasing their tax rate more than the 2.5%.
So both of those items, the removal of motor vehicle tax, so that actually did not get out of committee in the current year. That's been proposed for a long time and has not come out of committee.
Changed it a little bit to over 5 years, trying to get it in.
Correct. And we haven't seen that come out of committee yet. But anyway, that's on the grand list side. Same with increasing the assessment from 70 to 95%. That's also on the grand list side. So that doesn't change our expenditure calculation. That just changes the mill rate calculation. That's all that does, is it changes the mill rate calculation. So yes, if they were to reduce the grand list by all the motor vehicles, that would be increasing the mill rate. If they changed the value from a 70% valuation to a 90% valuation, that would actually decrease the mill rate, because you're activating more of your grand list as a taxable grand list. So whether or not they would balance out, I think, is very dependent on each individual town's grand list. But one is an increase to the mill rate, one would be a decrease to the mill rate. But again, that's all on the revenue side. That doesn't impact expenditure calculation.
I have a couple, and I think she was talking about how it would affect our status, right, as a disadvantaged community, not the grand list. But anyway, so my first question is, weren't we up around 6% last year? And then my other question, which is somewhat unrelated, will that affect our 10% exemption for housing?
So I don't have the calculation of what we originally presented to you last year in front of me, so I would have to go back and look to see what that percentage was. I know that the state's percentage was about 6% as well. So, it may have been that high because that was the first year we were also bringing in armed security officers, and we also had a higher debt issuance. So there were, no, debt issuance wouldn't be it, but we did have the law enforcement officers coming on board, so that would have driven that number up. But I don't have that number right off the top of my head. And would it impact our 10% for affordable housing? No. That has no impact on whether or not we're meeting 10% or not meeting 10%.
I thought we were exempt because we were disadvantaged. No? It's just because we do it already. Is that
It's
it?
because we do it
Okay.
already. That's why we're exempt under that. We do it already. We're above the 10% right now. So the rest of this A section, I've basically explaining what our next processes are. Your public hearing is on this coming Thursday, the 11th, at the high school. And then subsequently the annual town meeting and the referendum. The next 2 pages, I've outlined the unrestricted fund balance. So this is our historical fund balance. And this is what when we were talking about capital projects, right now, this budget that's before you is projecting the use of $2 million of fund balance for that pavement renewal program. That could, and that leaves the proposed fund balance at a 20.8%. If you chose to activate the additional 1.2 million of fund balance to increase that to match what you're doing for road renewal, that would decrease your percentage, but it would only decrease it by about 1%, 19.8, right? And you'll note that we have the estimated FY24 fund balance at just under 17.5 million. The proposed fund balance for FY25, there's only a decrease for that 2 million. We're not showing a big increase in order to support that 20.8% or a big turn back to, support that 20.8, right? So we're being very conservative on what would be potentially going in to fund that investment. So I think that's why I say, I think for those that have been on the council for a while know that I am usually incredibly cautious around the use of fund balance, and I usually will put up all the red flags and the guide rails and remind everyone the consequences of using fund balance. In this instance, because this is directly capital related, and because your fund balance is in a good position, and we are very conservative on what we're looking at for potential turnbacks in upcoming years, you are positioned well to still use that and to increase that utilization. That will be a very easy conversation for us to have with our credit rating agencies. I think that we wouldn't have any pushback or concern from the credit rating on that. The next page is, what does this mean to you? So this is really talking about what are the big components of the budget and how are they impacting the mill rate. So the first one, as Frank had, public commenter Frank had indicated, was that the reduction to 21.2 mils is actually a 5.68 mil rate reduction. That's why I reflect it as the grand list impact of revaluation adjustment. Above that, I have operational cost impacts, and that's all these various, what are these different operations doing and how are they impacting the budget? How many mills are they actually impacting the budget on? And then that capital project, the additional capital project appropriation, what would that do? So you can, and I also put the links at the bottom of how you look everything up, right? And those are active links that people can look at on the website. Are we good? So I am going to actually bypass our B pages because those are just summary pages. Those roll everything up into summary pages.
This was a little confusing to me, Mary, I apologize. A9, when one thing was saying capital projects is 0.69, and then the other said 0.41.
So, right, so that is because this is reflecting the increase from the 2.5 to the 3.2, the expenditure piece. The other one is reflecting the overall total increase in that and the reduction in the use of fund balance. So the total net impact of increasing this and reducing the amount of fund balance use gets you the 0.69. It's the combination of the two. Thank you for asking that. Okay. So we're going to go to the C pages, which in your books are the green pages. This is our revenue side. And so this is just to outline and review with you all the various revenues that are going to offset the expenditures that we're going to be talking throughout the rest of the book. As you can see, we recognize Lake Road Generating funding separately, although it is currently sitting as a item as a taxable grand list, regular assessment. That is in negotiation, so you see it at the 6.2. We further in our expenditures reduce out that little over $3 million as a capital expenditure. So we're only recognizing revenue offsetting mill rate at 3.1 million. We've gone through, back taxes, liens, tax interest. That's based on reviewing with our tax collector where those back tax collections are going. I did increase that back on the back taxes from her original assumption, and that was with a lot of conversation of our revenue collector. They are going to do another round of collection agency push for back taxes, and that has been successful in the past. So, and looking at our trends and what we have for back taxes collection to be made, we think that the 550 is an attainable number, and then that drives the tax interest number as well. Building permits, you're going to see that fluctuates year over year. I've only increased it a small amount in the upcoming year. We are not seeing any large oncoming or immediate building permit activity. So in prior years, you see big numbers because of Frito-Lay and Putnam Plastics. They've done substantial expansions. We're not seeing those at this point in time. Not to say that there won't be something that will come in, but for budgetary purposes, we are a little more conservative on what our trending revenues are going to be. Most of the other ones are fairly, similar to the current year. Minor changes in those overall. Does anybody have any questions on the first page? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the next one. State, this is really a lot of our state grants. The state grants in lieu of taxes and the other state grants, these are the numbers that are directly from the governor's budget. We are not seeing any indication from legislation that any of these are really going to have any substantial changes. So we are capturing those. The Mohegan Pequot grant, we have not recognized that for the last several years, as the town has not been eligible for that, and we continue to have that line zeroed. The remaining group is charges for services, and this is, you're seeing a reduction in the community development fees because we have completed that consulting services for some of the other towns that we were doing consulting for their housing rehab projects. Those have come to an end. We still have a couple that are still ongoing, so we will still be receiving some revenue for that. However, that is starting to decrease. And then the other ones are overall substantially similar to the current fiscal year in what we're receiving for revenue.
I have a question.
Sure.
I apologize. C1, I'm always a little bit behind, like
it's
what
okay.
you're reading.
okay.
The interest income is always so volatile.
It is.
And where does it go when we underestimate?
It just comes here. So if we underestimate any of our revenues, it gets posted to revenue here, and then it would ultimately be turned back to the general fund as an increase to the general fund balance.
Like, do we see that in a transfer later in the year or
No,
something?
it actually just gets reflected in your revenues. You see it in the revenue report that you get on a monthly basis. You would see it in that, and then for audit purposes, it gets rolled up into the fund balance at the end of the year. So it would be added into fund balance. Okay, and so with regards to interest income, it's how the market is for interest. We do have some longer term CDs 3 to 5 year CDs that we try and tier to try and garner some of those higher interest rate percentages. But as we know, those have still been volatile as well too. So we've had some differences on that. Okay. Are we good on C2, which is state grants, other state grants, charges for services? Seeing good for that, we'll go to C3. C3 is other revenues. So this is where we recognize miscellaneous revenues that we may be receiving. KERMA, if they do a share distribution, we've gotten reimbursement. This is where we recognize that. You're noticing a new line, cannabis local revenue share. So we do have our cannabis retailer that they are required to pay a local tax. And so we have started receiving those. That revenue, though, is actually restricted on how it can be used. It's restricted for streetscapes, arts and culture, or impact or assisting directly impacted communities. So in this budget that's presented to you, you'll notice when we get to the recreation department that this is actually being assigned to offsetting recreation department expenses as arts and culture, right? So just be mindful of that as we're going through, that does have an actual restriction on it by state statute. The sewer funds that you see here are actual revenues from the sewer operating fund into this. It's offsetting debt costs. It's also offsetting staff costs that we perform for the WPCA. So bill collection, the engineering department's oversight. Also, we are now sharing an administrative assistant between the town engineering department and the WPCA, so that there is this is providing some savings to the town's budget in addition to what has been previously. Some of my time in overseeing the WPCA process. Those are all of those. Telecommunications is our cell tower leases, what we're receiving for cell tower leases, and that's based on those actual lease contracts. The law enforcement, you're seeing the law enforcement, the SRO and ASO reimbursement. So this is the reimbursements that we get for the portion of time that the SRO spends with the school during the summer months. He is charged to the regular, we don't get a reimbursement for them because, for the SRO, because he is doing patrol. He becomes full patrol, for the, summer months, unless the school decides to request his, services for summer school or something like that. Then he would transition back. And then also the ASOs. Why is there a decrease in that revenue? We had initial startup costs in the prior year's budget that the school also had to pay for. So some of those startup costs have been alleviated out of the budget. And then we get to the actual school's revenue, and this is what they have declared to you for revenue. So the educational cost sharing, the VOAG, Tech Ed, and the non-public school health. Those three are state grant. We get those numbers directly from the governor's budget. The other three, the tuitions, those are what their estimated tuitions are based on what their estimated enrollments are and what they're projecting for that. And then the last section is where we're recognizing how much fund balance utilization you're doing and for what category. So this is the current year. The town had authorized a little over 2.7 million for investment in capital projects. The budget that's before you is utilizing 2 million. Again, that could be something that the town council, when you're deliberating, you decide to increase that.
I have a question.
Yep.
School capital contribution
Yes.
is lower. What is that?
So that is, that number is based on, number one, the debt costs for the high school, broken down on a per pupil basis, and then based on the projected enrollment from Brooklyn. That's why it's decreased. So number one, the debt service for the high school is starting to fall off. Number two, they're projecting a lower enrollment. You're welcome.
Where's the NIPS money that we get? Where does that show up?
So the NIPS, you'll see that in a separate fund in the F pages because that is very restricted. And so we have actually taken some of the expenditures out of this budget that are qualifying for specifically that fund, and we have created a completely separate fund for that. So you'll see that in the F pages. We have a new fund for that.
I have a question on line 4419, the law enforcement SRO ASO reimbursement.
Yes.
You would reference startup costs and how there was a reduction, but I'm looking at the 23-24 approved and an estimate. Why was there such a difference from the 531 that was approved to the 296 that we received back? Was that due to staffing levels?
Yes.
And will there be any additional startup rolled into once they bring those other staff on board?
So we've already incurred the additional startup so we had this current year, the fourth ASO just started about a month ago. And so we are only anticipating potentially having to roll one more ASO into next year's. But hopefully we'll have that person onboarded before the end of the current fiscal year. And then we'll have the Board of Ed will have incurred all of those startup costs. I will say a large bulk of those startup costs have already been incurred because we purchased all of the service equipment, all of the service weapons. We purchased, what we could purchase because we knew we needed to have 5. They actually have to purchase a couple of extra as backups. We purchased all of those things well in advance. Radios, all purchased. So all of those occurred right up front. And the remaining, clearly staff we've been onboarding throughout this time period. So the upcoming year we have pretty much, we're almost fully staffed at this point in time. We're looking to add one more, and hopefully we'll be able to get that onboarded before the end of the school year. That make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions on revenue before we move over into the D pages? Ready to dive into D pages. Expenditure side. Everybody take your revenue hat off. Do you want to take a moment to stand up?
Yeah, I was going to go get another coffee.
we can't pause it? So just know that, right, we're gonna ask everybody to turn off their microphones, because I don't know that we want to take the stream up and down for a momentary pause. So just know that the stream is still live.
I just need to stretch. I didn't do yoga this morning and I can feel it. Oh. Hello, Mr. Krutula, you're so quiet over there.
Thank you.
I wanted to, I like Mr. LaBelle. I really like him, but that was not today. And I really hope he comes to the SEDS meeting, because he has so much information to throw at Nico. Like, it would be amazing, because they're really up to no good. As far as I'm concerned. I wouldn't say no good, but they're aligning their plan with state legislation right now, and I pointed that out, and they didn't like it. But it's true. I was just, and I really like, but why would, as soon as he said, let's go. I don't wanna be on camera with this one. He's such a nice man. Going through transition to see.
always say the same thing, the difference for them is, if you're giving your children
Okay. All right. Yeah, all right. Okay. Okay. So we need to come back. I apologize. Just because we are still live, and I want to, so everyone that's here, we were just talking about the difference between Aldi's products and other Aldi's products, right? So there was no deliberation with regards to the budget or any further explanation.
Healthy, so we
Right.
can serve our community
We are.
in longevity.
So we are actually starting now with the D pages. So this is D page number 1. We are going to be going through each of these pages. You're going to see that there's a lot of them. We don't have any real significant differences from the current year. There's several of them that have reductions. I will be speaking to really kind of anything that has any major fluctuation percentage-wise, but feel free to ask me questions for any of them and all of them. So town council, this is the
I just have a comment or a question. Is there any way for, like, next year's budget to have a year to date, say, when the book is handed out, could we have like a year to date, like for, as far as like April 1st, like to April 1st? Because if you look at the highway storm, like maintenance, the line items are, approved 115,000, expended 115,000, because we haven't had that many storms, so like an actual expenditure.
So we would probably be able to do an expenditure actual date potentially through the end of February, because we have to do a production of this book.
Yeah,
right?
anything.
So we
that
might
would-
be able to consider that for the next year. So we'll make a note of that and see
Okay.
if we can add in an actual line. And then, so your estimate line is where we believe the final total expenditure for that line is going to be at the end of June 30th. But point taken, and yes, we'll see what we can do as far as putting that in, and obviously we'll have a date on that so everyone knows how far that's through. Does that make sense? Okay. So for town council, this is the budget that incorporates the costs associated with what you perform on an annual basis, or the costs associated to perform with the town council. The printing is really the only increase, and that is really due because of the increase in paper costs that we're seeing, and you're going to see that trend kind of all the way through most of the budgets. And this is really, the printing here is the budget. It's the books that you're looking at right now. So we don't expend a lot in the beginning part of the year with regards to printing. There is obviously your council packets that get, and sometimes, like if you look at your council packet for Tuesday, it's hefty.
I was going to say, for people watching at home, there's a lot of paper.
There's a lot of paper for this, right? So, so that's really what that $300 increase cost is, overall. But we're into, professional development, that is the, dues for CCM. A tip for the municipality to be a member of CCM, and they have already set those rates, so we know what they are, so that's what we're reflecting directly.
I have a question. So on the salaries, last year we couldn't make an adjustment because it was an election year and we weren't sure who would be here and who wouldn't be here, but I know that there are several people that don't accept the 1,500. Can we reflect that somehow?
So in the budget, we typically reflect the full obligation. If the council so decides to change that, that would be your decision, but as the fiduciary responsibility, we're required to reflect the full amounts in the budget. So entirely up to the council that's here, if you choose to change that at the council level.
Just a quick comment in the description at the heading there. It just says the representatives elected by voters every 2 years
Oh, you're
for
right,
district.
it's wrong.
and, yeah,
Let me
just
fix that.
update that. Thank you.
And if you note the estimate in the current fiscal year, you'll note that that is reflecting that we don't expect to fully expend the salary because there are certain individuals on the council that are not taking those stipends. So we do reflect it as far as, if you
The
look at
top
town
line.
council under the estimate for 23-24, you see that we are not anticipating to fully expend the 13.5 because there are a couple of council members that are not receiving that stipend. Did you see that?
Thought you meant it was, I thought you meant it was a narrative. I was looking for a
No,
narrative.
oh, yeah, no, it's in the estimate number.
I will just like to add to that. Back during, I believe it was during COVID, the entire council we did take a vote. I was chair at the time, and I said that unless every council member unanimously was in favor of it, I wouldn't have considered it. But it was everybody, all the council members did unanimously vote to remove that item from the budget, which in a sense means we didn't get our salary for that year. I believe at the time.
Correct, that was the fiscal year 2021. So if you look at that column, you'll see zeros in both
Yeah.
the budget and expenditure line. And that is because the council did all vote to forego their stipends that year. And it was removed from the budget.
You can remove my stipend.
We have to, you guys can make whatever adjustments when it comes to the town council. This is the town manager's presentation to all of you. You can make decisions when you deliberate. All right, so are we good with town council? We'll move over to the town manager's budget. Town manager's budget, there's the change with regards to salary is, and a lot of the clerical is just related to those singular days. There is one union position that is a portion, it's only a portion of that individual's salary that's here. That position is actually shared by 3 departments. So that contractual increase is reflected here as well. I did recognize overtime in the town is required to, individuals have the right to decide that they want to receive pay as overtime or take comp time as an alternative. The town doesn't get to dictate that. And I know for a long time in this budget, that was pretty much well dictated. I've stopped that practice. My office doesn't have a lot of overtime, but there are times when we have a packet like you just have, and we're trying to formulate everything together. There are times that my executive assistant needs to stay over a few hours to make sure that everything is buttoned up and put up on the website and everything. We really try and avoid that. But, it's not, it's not a frequent use. And there are many times that position will take comp time as opposed to taking overtime, but we should budget an amount should overtime be needed, especially with like our budget presentations and things like that. There are times when that has to occur in order to meet deadlines. So that's why the request for that overtime. And then largely going through printing, obviously my printing on my budget is increased the same as the town council because of paper. Advertising is a reduction on my budget, largely due to looking, number one, at historical trends. Number two, we've been really looking at trying to do more web-based or seeing my executive assistant. She's very adept at writing. She's actually started writing a section called Killingly Chronicles for the Villager. That's actually going to be free. So we're trying to explore alternatives around advertising in order to be able to accommodate things. And then postage and delivery. We've been doing a lot more electronically as opposed to physically having to mail. So even though there's a postage increase, we've been doing a lot more electronically as opposed to that physically through the mail kind of thing.
So I just have a comment in regards to the Killingly Chronicles. I haven't seen that because I don't get the Villager. Does that include any of the meetings? Because then
Yes.
Okay. 'Cause
That's
there
all
was-
it includes, is
Okay.
meetings.
All right, because somebody, one of the residents asked about advertising for meetings, so I'll have to say that it's.
So we only advertise the town council, not meetings for like general events or community events and stuff like that.
But what
Because,
about like
but like,
future budget like the.
yes,
those-
we'll have those we'll put those in that article.
And the, he said that the Vitus Energy, so if there was enough time, would have that been able to be?
It would have, there wasn't enough time.
Okay,
The
All
the
right.
timing for Villager is a 2-week time period.
okay,
So there's some things that are not going to be able to get in there simply because there is not enough time to get it in there.
All right,
From
I'll
the
let-
time that we have to submit it to the time it actually publishes, there's a pretty good size gap.
all right, I'll let him know.
But
Do you
we'll
mean
do our
ad-
best to get as much on
ads
there.
or articles or letters to the editor?
Articles and stuff like that.
So
You have
that's
to
2
sub-
weeks, yeah.
Yeah,
'cause
it's
the
almost,
letter.
it's not quite a 2-week, but it's pretty close. And so from the time that you submit it, that you can actually submit it to the time it actually publishes, there's a pretty substantial gap.
And you might have said that. Do we pay? We don't pay?
For the article that Ashley is writing, we don't have to pay it. But for advertisements, we have to pay. So that's where we try. So Ashley's just starting to try and write this article to be responsive to your visioning, your goal setting session. You know, we talked about some of those comments, and she said, "Let me check." You know, she kind of took that ball and is trying to be responsive to that. And I appreciate her efforts on that. And so she's really trying to encapsulate as much information as she can as far as meetings to get that out on there. But we got to make sure that it's really an article and not just an advertisement, because it could very quickly turn into an advertisement that we have to pay for. So we're trying to, balance that appropriately. So overall, I have a 1% increase on the manager's budget. Any question on the manager's budget? Hearing none, we're going to go to legal services. Legal services, for professional services, this is our Halloran and Sage, and any specialty attorneys that we might need to utilize throughout the fiscal year. We do anticipate to be under budget in the current fiscal year, but I am recommending that we remain flat. We never know what we're going to have for litigation that may crop up. Probate, that is a per capita cost that we get from the regional probate office, and they've sent us what the expected cost is going to be for next year, so that is the only increase in this budget.
Staying with the professional services, like, we spent a lot of money on, what was it, 11 Maple Street?
Correct.
That's not over yet.
It is over.
Okay,
That finalized.
okay, well, that's good,
That's finalized. But so yes, the town did incur a lot of legal fees over the years for that. And that's why my recommendation is always to remain level and committed to your level funding on your legal fees, because you never know what may crop up for litigation that the town is going to get involved in. So while we anticipate this year we'll be under budget, something could crop up tomorrow, right? Or, something could crop up in the middle of next year, right? That is going to be a substantial legal investment. And that's why the recommendation to remain at 90,000.
So with these projects that are coming on, you don't see any need for additional legal services? The battery issue and the renegotiation of Lake Road, or is that unique?
So with regards to, so,
Lake Road is, right, once we get over it, we're good for
Right.
however the.
and
long
we've been expending that out of our current operating budget for legal. That's been paid for out of here. So I don't foresee that I don't think that there's a need to increase this request. Any other questions on legal? We'll move to town clerk. Town clerk, on the salary piece, you're only seeing those one-day differentials really in the salary line items. You're seeing a substantial amount of decrease, so this budget actually decreases by 1% overall. And this is really just, again, we really are diligent about walking through what our actual needs and costs are going to be in the upcoming year.
I got one question as far as the one-day increase. Isn't this a leap year that we're in now? So would it still be a one-day increase going into next year?
It's the way that the actual work days fall. So the work days for the current year, the end of the year, we have 2 days that are weekends. Next year, we have the year ends on a Monday. So we have to fold that Monday in. So it's a week, it's weekdays, right? It's,
Yeah. I know, I was just thinking,
I
normally
know.
year to year, you're shifting.
I had the same question
It's
with,
Friday, this day, the first is a Friday, then it's a Saturday. But
Yeah.
then with a leap year, it actually shifts.
flips. Yes.
So
Two,
if we didn't
so.
budget for it, then the auditors would come in and make an audit adjustment, and then I have no budget for that, and we would argue.
Yeah, so we make sure we budget for the actual expenditures that we're going to hit in the budget year, right? And even by the day. So that's what that calculation is. Any questions on town clerk? Seeing none, we'll go over to finance. So the finance department, there's not really much in with regards to changes. You are seeing an increase in the technical line, and that is a negotiated contract. So that's reflecting contractual changes. And the rest of them are largely just that one day change. Everything else is remaining the same. Any questions? We will move on to assessors. My apologies. The assessors department, again, in personnel, you're seeing with regards to salary administrative, the 1 day. Technical, again, that is a contractual obligated. They have reduced their overtime because we are not going to be in a revaluation, so they're not going to be having additional heavy lift around revaluation. They believe we can come off of that. And historically, in years that they don't have revaluation, we really haven't seen much in overtime for that department. Secondly, contractual services. The knowledge and reference, they're going to need we have a newer assistant assessor who is going through additional training courses to be fully certified as an assessor. That's an investment that we're doing, and that position will need to have some of those additional pricing guides, class training material, that type of stuff. Any questions on assessor?
Could you just go over the technical, what is that, and who is that? It's contractual.
Professional technical is the assistant assessors. They're in the professional technical union. And so that unit is, that bargaining unit, the contract is existing. And so that's just the negotiated increase. Make sense? Okay. Everybody's good with assessor. We'll move to revenue collection. Revenue collection, you're seeing a decrease, and that is largely due to revamping that we've done within that office. We've had a pretty significant shift in personnel in that office. We had our long-term staff that retired last year after the budget process completed. This year, so we have a new revenue collector. We also have a new assistant revenue collector and a new part-time clerk. Actually, that position currently is vacant. We're in the process of trying to fill that, so they're kind of still under the gun. They also moved one of the so that's really what you're seeing here is that overall shift in how we reorganize that that department. That's providing that $12,000 savings. And overall, in the contractual services part, it's really really looking at what the demands and needs are for professional development. We do have, you have to fix this. Okay. We do have some additional certifications that they have to complete and finalize as we as they're, as they train their new staff, right? They have newer staff in there, so they have to get through that training process. But
Mary-
overall, we have a decrease. Yep, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm back on this, this technical, like, wow. So I know it's assessment year. Do you see a change? Because you're like 50, 50, 50, 50, and then it came out at 90, and then 127, and now 130. Is that ever going to drop again, or that's where we're at?
So recognize that, so when we see technical here, that is just the name of the union, right? That's our assistant assessor. That's
no,
not,
so that's the assistant assessor.
and we have 2 assistant assessors.
And we jumped up
we had two.
$40,000 in 2022, and then another, so that's just,
That's personnel. So number one, in hiring a new assistant assessor, market has changed dramatically around assessors in general.
so that increase a couple of years ago was another person.
So the
In technical.
right. So on the assessor's budget, number one, we had an increase in the assessor line itself because market changed. When we had a previous employee leave and we were hiring for a new assessor, we could not attract an assessor at that level. Assistant assessor, when we had another staff leave, we had an assistant assessor. We made the conscious decision of hiring another assistant assessor because assessors are very hard to find, and we almost need to grow our own, hopefully looking for that succession planning, another assessor. Assistant assessors right now they're expensive. Part of the reason for that is there's very few people that are passing certification. So while they perform incredibly well in the tests, while they're performing very well in the class and the training, when they go to sit for the assessor test, they're only seeing about a 20% passage rate. So I think one of the last classes that went through the training and sat for the test, they had about 15 to 20 people sit for that test, and I want to say only 3 passed it. The rest failed, right? And so this is very similar to what we're seeing in wastewater industry. Very similar to that, right? Like, people do great in the classes, they go to take that test, and wastewater's worse at like almost a 1% passage rate, but assessors are the same way. And so the assistant assessors, we did a lot of research on market costs for assessors. We only hired in the median. We are not even towards the upper level of that wage base, but we found that in transitioning, that office as well has a number of new staff. That is what we're seeing from market pressure.
No, so it was just one, so it's always been one employee, then it changed, and when you had to hire, it was a significant jump, and now it's just following the trend.
So in what you'll notice in 2020, fiscal year 2022, we had an assistant assessor and we had an assessing clerical position, right? We determined back then that when that clerical position retired, that it was more beneficial for the town to invest in that secondary assistant assessor position because that provided better value to the town overall for the investment. And that's where you see that change. Yeah. I mean, maybe in the future, we're always looking at that. So I will say categorically across the board, when we have a position that a person retires or vacates, my first step with every department head is explain to me why we need the position. That's the first. What are we actually needing for demands for workloads? We don't fill a position just because it was always there. We fill a position and we fill it based on what we actually need. So in the future, if we determine that we only need that we need an assessor, an assistant assessor, and then it's okay to go back to an assessor clerk, we would make that decision. You're welcome.
I just have one question. While we're talking about the assessor and the positions, the change in the salary line, did that have anything to do with when our assessor was also our assistant town manager?
Yes.
And then there was a shift because if you look at the years when there was a shift in that, there was also a year and a shift on the town manager budget as well.
Yes, you're correct. There was also that shift as well. It was a split 50-50 between the town managers as the assistant town manager and then also as the assessor. So it's a little hard, I agree, to look at the historical trends on that one because there was some multifunctionality of some of that and then market pressures that also impacted.
And what are the transportation costs associated? Because the actual for 22-23 was $15.
So we're looking at revenue. I'm looking at assessor still and I was like, wait a
No,
minute, I
no,
don't see
that's-
transportation.
No, that's transportation.
You're looking at revenue office though.
Oh, okay.
Revenue collection,
Correct, revenue
transportation.
collection. So yeah, that is travel to their classes. We have to reimburse mileage because those are mandatory classes. If there is an available fleet vehicle for them to take, revenue typically doesn't have an assigned fleet vehicle at all because they very rarely are outside of the office. Yeah, their classes are at night as well. So they may not, we may not have an available fleet vehicle for them to keep because it may need to be out for inspections early the next morning. So that we have to reimburse mileage, and that's based on the IRS mileage rate. Yes, and however that changes with the IRS mileage rate, that's all that is. And we're required also under union contract.
Thank you.
Any other questions on revenue? Okay, seeing none, let's go to the registrars, the registrations and elections. So this one, you're going to see some pretty significant differences between department and manager on this one. And let me explain what that is. So we are very unclear as to what early voting is going to do to our costs, right? And we are very unclear as to how much reimbursement the town is going to get from the state for early voting and how frequently that is going to be. The registrars proposed covering all of what they thought we were going to have for early voting costs in the operating budget. I have scaled back on that. You can clearly change my number. I have scaled back on that because of the uncertainty. We really don't understand what that is. And given that the town has the availability to look at potentially our contingency, look at, that funding from the state that may offset that, I really felt that I didn't want to knee jerk up to what would be our highest level potential exposure. I thought that we had an ability to take this year, and I understand it's a presidential year, so there's a higher probability of more frequent early voting that potentially is going to happen in this year, but that would really get us a good understanding of what that impact is, and then we could move forward with subsequent year budgeting. So that's why my proposal is pretty substantially different from them. I will say they did a fantastic job of really trying to quantify what that looks like in the world of uncertainty around that. They're still getting guidance around that. I think that after this last early voting process that they just went through, my bet is that there's going to be further guidance that they're going to get that's going to further change or tweak the processes in the upcoming early voting process. So that's really what you're seeing there is with regards to that difference. But that I did recommend an increase in our registration and election workers because I think there is still going to be some town impact to that. I just don't know that I didn't feel comfortable in recognizing such a substantial impact. Does that make sense? All the other ones, it's really looking at what their actual costs are anticipated to be, like advertising. They have to do certain advertising. Where they have to do that advertising, that has increased in cost. Professional development, the registrars that we have completed their required courses. One of them still has to do a final test on it, which is why we were able to come down on professional development. Bless you in there. Contractual services support. Is that the cards? Yes. That's the cards, and they're not going to have to do those. correct?
They have to do some of them.
They have to do some of them, but I think they're now considered in contractual services M&E. We combine those lines. Contractual services support, contractual services M&E, those are reflected together now because it's really kind of dicing hairs. Like, is this support? Is this M&E? And so we just combine those two for this budget. It just doesn't make sense to split it, which is why you're seeing kind of that shift. So overall, this does have an increase, largely to do what I'm considering for early voting impact. Does that make sense?
Well, getting with that, we have early voting at the town hall, and we have our regular voting at the polling places. And I guess when I early voted, I guess it was a good thing that I experienced that. But the signage at the town, I don't know, all the time signage, that's a different type of signage component. That wouldn't be a big cost, but it is a cost. I don't know how you go about that, because you have the parking lot, we have Main Street.
Right.
And then maybe if you could elaborate on how many early voters or percentage just.
Oh, so I to be honest, I really don't know how many early voters we had. I haven't had a chance to really circle up with the registrars. I mean, that was a preliminary primary, so I really haven't had an opportunity to touch base with them. As far as signage at the town hall, that is a learning process, of making sure that people, especially on the Saturday, know where to go. So that's really directional signs. I think we really probably have stands that we can use, and then we can probably, for very minimal impacts, actually create additional directional signs in and around the town hall to get people to where they need to go. So, I got that feedback from you before. Great feedback on that. And we're going to definitely work to try and create some additional signage both outside and internally to better direct people like where they're supposed to go, in order to be able to participate in that early voting process.
And then the other thing, on the regular polling places, we have it at the polling place, but like Route 12 and Westfield Avenue, we've never historically put a sign there. I don't know if we can have access to the property. Right at the like at the high school, it's nice, it's the state highway, it's the driveway to the school.
Right.
We can put a sign or
I can check into it.
board, which is great.
Yeah, I can check into it.
But if we could do something at,
I'm not sure because that's a state road and then private property.
well, that's
So-
what I'm getting at, it's a.
But anyway, it's always something to look into.
Other than that, it seemed to be, I didn't have to call Matt, usually there's always a conversation between me and him about signage or.
He enjoys your conversations.
But,
Yep.
and as far as the town hall too, that would be just, but then this is brand new, so this is all learning curve. And I don't know how much we're gonna get, I mean, the state should help us out on some of this stuff. I don't know how we can advocate to our legislators that, that's a big burden.
Right, and I will say,
on top of this.
when you talk to your legislators, make sure you bring that up. But I know CCM and cost have been doing a very heavy push. We've been really trying to quantify to CCM and cost what our actual exposure and also what availability. This is a bigger pressure than just the financial dollars. This is also pressure of, we largely have volunteers for election workers, and do you have enough available to do the number of hours that they're looking to do? I mean, a lot of our registrars, in some small towns, the registrars work full-time in other places. One of our registrars works full-time. They're not available to just drop their regular work and come sit here for, 10 days, right? So that is another impact. And those are things that we've been really pushing. And I know CCM and cost have had pretty significant conversations around those and really trying to push for additional reimbursement. Again, with the pushback that we're getting from the state and legislators is, maybe you're over thinking of that cost. Maybe you're thinking it's going to be a bigger exposure than what it really is. I think they want to go through a proving period of how much are you really expending? How much is this really going to cost before they really start committing to whatever that dollar is? I know right now they've dedicated $10,500 per municipality for early voting. We'll see how that impacts or how that aligns with the early voting we just did, and then push.
Just thinking back to years ago, looking at GIS maps right around where Route 12 and Rock Ave are, there's something weird with those parcels right at that intersection. So there may be a piece of, on the western side of 12 that the town owns.
This would be this is North Road, not Rock Ave, where
I
he's
mean,
looking to place the sign.
Not Rock Ave.
North
yeah.
Street, not North Road,
Yeah.
sorry, you're right.
Yeah, no,
North
no.
Street and
Yeah, not Rock.
12.
What is?
But I'll look at it.
So-
It's North Street, yeah, so I'll look at that and see if there's an opportunity to place a directional sign. Any other questions on?
Yeah, I forgot, I was supposed to mention this to you at some point, that I have a couple people requesting to put a camera on that box. Is there just one drop box in the town?
Camera on
The voting
Early
drop
voting
box?
box.
Oh, that's actually, there is only one. That is actually at the town hall. We already have camera coverage.
Terrific, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I just want to correct myself. It was Soap Street and Route 12, not Rock.
Oh, okay.
There's
That's
some
true.
weird parcels.
There is some
up
weird
there.
parcels through there, especially with the railroad right there. Yeah. If everybody's good with registrars and elections, we'll move over to town commissions and service agencies. Yes.
I guess this would have to do with the actual day of voting, that the registrars are accompanied by either law enforcement. So at the last presidential election, the ballots were picked up by the registrar, nobody with them.
Okay. I will make sure I review that with them. Okay? All right, town commissions and service agencies. So this is all of essentially your boards and commissions. It does also include the dues for NECOG as part of our regional board and commission that we participate in. I did incorporate $1,000 in for temporary commissions because of the goal setting session with looking at wanting to have a vision committee. You would likely incur costs with regards to either advertising and also potentially a secretary, minute taker for those meetings. But largely everything else I reviewed. Housing Authority, that one is based on the sewer charge. So we pay the sewer fee in this year. Next year, we'll get that as a revenue. So it's offset a year for the Housing Authority to be able to build that into their budget process. All the other ones are based on, so the inland wetlands, the conservation, and the ag commission annually, whatever is unexpended in those budgets, the town council transfers into open space. So I've looked at how much the past few years they've been having transferred to open space. And we reduced that to show what they're actually expending on an annual basis, to be more in line with what their actual expenditures are. And that's really what that is for those. So overall, there's only a small increase in that budget. Any questions?
Under the temporary commissions,
Yeah.
for 24, 25, it's, the department has no request, but you've added 1,000, but it shows a 0% increase.
Well, that's just a.
She'll fix that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We've
When we
s-
add something and it's got the zero, it does that crazy, so I had to
Oh,
hard
that-
code that, I just didn't catch it.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Thank you for that.
0 times any number is 0.
Really should be 100%.
When Excel gets mad at me, it's like, for some reason, so.
We'll fix that. Thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Okay. Good on that one. We'll move to planning and development. Planning and development, on the salaries, the first two lines are really just the 1 day difference. And the technical, that incorporates overall the collective impact with regards to the contractual increase overall. So everything else, they have some minor other adjustments, but for the most part, very small increase here. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll go to information technology. Info technology, we do have an increase in contractual services support. So this budget actually incorporates not just our network servicing, our network monitoring and support for that, but also any subscription or annual maintenance for any of our computer programs. So like the finance software, the building department software, all of those softwares that we utilize have an annual maintenance fee associated with them, the website, all of that. That is all part of this budget. The biggest impact here is Microsoft. They are killing us. And there's nowhere really to go but Microsoft. So they have had a pretty substantial increase. Novus did have a small increase this year. I will say they are incredibly mindful of when they're increasing, and they're very, very diligent in minimizing any increase and brainstorming how the towns can save money. So they've been very good with all of that. But this year we do have a small increase from Novus. Your biggest increase here is really related to those Microsoft Office charges, the Microsoft Suite charges that we really don't have control over.
What about televising these meetings and whatnot?
You get that for free. We have Jen.
Well, I mean, how does, you know, I'm always
We don't-
here, I'm
yeah.
here most of the time, so I don't get to view it. But the few times I do view things, I know the people in play, but a lot of time, I'd be ashamed to let people, it's just a lousy, when it gets to the TV.
So I will say Channel 22 has still been a struggle with regards to quality on Channel 22.
Here or is that someplace else?
No, Channel 22, we don't pay for Channel 22. You get what you pay for sometimes. Our second one that we do is we do Facebook. And I will say that one, we recognize clearly we have been exploring what are other options around microphones that would give better audio quality to Facebook and subsequently to Channel 22. There's a few challenges with that. Some of the better quality microphones are actually battery operated, right? Which means we have a lot of boards and commissions in here. Who's checking those batteries on a regular basis to make sure that a battery isn't going dead in the middle of a meeting, right? That can be challenging. Secondly, this is something that the microphones cannot, there's no microphone that can handle this. Some of us, like I'm here talking into our microphone. Some of us are here. Some of us are here. Some of us are way back here. Some of us don't. Ed, we're all guilty of it. We are all guilty of it because we are used to being in the room in a conversation, right? And so when you become in a conversation, sometimes you forget about this black thing that's sitting in front of you and you're just naturally relaxed and you're having a conversation with the people in your room, right? The microphones can't automatically adjust. Now, years ago, we used to have somebody that sat in that booth and physically ran it and changed the camera angles and did all of those things, right? It was costly. But at the same time, Jen tries to sit back there. We don't really have the ability to change the angles. And she does try and scoot the microphones to adjust where people are comfortable in being, in speaking into the microphone. But, we don't really have somebody to sit there and play audio visual person that we're going to pay as a stipend in order to be able to produce the meetings. And when we were under that model, and we weren't doing Facebook Live, we were really struggling with getting the playback portion of that, right? Many people were asking, when are we going to be able to rewatch those videos, right? We weren't getting great access to those on an ongoing basis, right? So, what we do right now for producing this is zero impact to your budget. Facebook Live is free. Channel 22, we don't pay for.
We also upload the Facebook, we download the Facebook feed and then re-upload it to YouTube a couple days after. So for anybody that also does not want to go back through Facebook to rewatch, maybe they don't have Facebook, it's a good opportunity to remind everybody, a couple days from now, this meeting will also be live or be able to, be able to be viewed on YouTube.
Right.
And once we have so many subscribers, little plug for us, there'll be more benefits to being able to more freely use YouTube. So if anyone's interested, we are out there on YouTube.
Right. And so our existing staff does all of that. We don't pay additional for any of that to occur. Our finance staff, our, for planning and zoning, our Jonathan is the one that manages that production and does those meetings. Jen largely does all of the town council meetings. So those are done by staff.
But maybe we should invest, I mean, I'm looking for transparency, people they put on the meeting, or if you're watching at home and you see something up there, forget it. You can't see that type of thing.
Well, I do try to pull, if there's a presentation up there, I do pull it into the feed. The other night, for example, I can't always do that depending on how much is going on.
Oh,
There's
no,
just not the capability to do that. But I do, like, I will, if there's a PowerPoint presentation, I do pull it to the Facebook. It does not go to 22 well. But I do try to pull those up. If it's a WebEx, you know, it's in a duplication of the room like right now, that's not really a good, it's not doing anything. However, if there's a WebEx presenter and they're then sharing their screen of something, I can pull that input in so the public can then see what you all are seeing. That's just a matter of switching the feed. And, you know, and then I do try, when there's a public at the podium, try to switch. Sometimes I cannot do that if I am driving a presentation.
Right.
It's just a matter of, you know, being at the battleship and how many, the Oz behind the curtain. You just can't, you know, so we try our best. We do have a grant out there, if whether we get awarded the grant or not, where we could upgrade some of the equipment here. So we are hopeful and we could upgrade some of the equipment that may allow for some other efficiencies and capabilities. I don't know that it's going to solve some of the 22 issues that are ongoing, but it gets us, everything gets us a step closer to that, because really that is a 22 issue on their end.
Well, if we had someone at the cable advisory, would that help, or, because I don't think we have anybody.
I am working on that. I had a conversation with the town manager about that the other day, trying to get myself and Mr. Whitehead onto it.
Right.
And for me, it's extremely easy to go to the meetings because they're at the Montville Town Hall, which is 3/4 of a mile from where I work.
Right. And I will say, Steve Marchessault is the Board of Ed appointee to the Cable Advisory. He used to operate this. He still operates the Board of Education's booth at KHS. He's very well aware. We still have regular communications around this with him. He's very well aware of these challenges and hurdles, and he purposely joined the Cable Advisory Committee to try and get movement on this, as well as Novus, our network support. They also push on the cable side to be able to try and get improvements. But again, for the cable, this is not a revenue source for them. Channel 22 is not a revenue source for them. And so you don't necessarily see the level of investment on their side for something that is non-revenue generating.
See, before when cable was regulated, we had some clout. Now it's totally unregulated. I remember one time calling Pura, oh, they're not regulated. They haven't been
Correct.
regulated for a while.
They haven't.
Wow.
Which is why it's a cable advisory committee.
Well, no, and that's where, how do you go to try to make, there's almost no avenue
Right.
to.
I would love to not have to talk about Channel 22.
Well, I don't.
Not that I don't want it there, right? Like, I want people to be able to have access to it in that way. However, we only have so much ability to improve the quality on our end, but when it has to be downgraded to get onto their platform, you lose all the benefits that you invest in on our side of the fence get lost when it goes over onto the cable side, and we don't have control over that. I wish we did.
No, that's
We
why-
just don't.
Well, that's why I need you to say that, so that if someone else
I'll say it over and over again.
bring it forward and.
Cheers.
I mean, and we have some old equipment in there that's patching 22 through. One of the modulators that's there, it doesn't exist. You can only buy it used on eBay. So when it goes, we can't go to 22 anymore.
And
So-
that's one of the pieces that we're looking to get changed.
I have one question. Rather than expending money on new microphones, have you looked at the possibility of swinging the microphones onto the side of the tables so they're closer to where they're
People
sitting?
like to use their hands.
Oh, mine will.
Many of us are part Italian, you know. We like to use, or French
Myself
Canadian. I'm
included.
French Canadian. I use my hands. We would not. It's just we can put the microphones wherever, and people have the ability to move the microphones right to where they find more comfortable. It is just the nature of us that we forget that this is in front of us, or we forget to push the button. You know, it's just what it is, right? And so, you know, we keep trying to come up with, you know, better ways of, you know, broadcasting this, and better ways for people to have that audio quality and better improved audio quality. But it also has to be super user friendly in this room. We don't have a singular person that's here that is controlling that. And, you know, we looked at maybe doing like, you know, general microphones in the room. Or just, you know, like where we wouldn't have microphones in front of us. But the challenge with that is audience is really close. You'd be
pick
amazed
up
at how much
everything.
conversation happens out there. Right? Or there are times when all of us have done this. Guess what happens? Right? You're on hot mic now, right? Not that we're trying to exclude the public from that conversation, but it stomps over what the other conversation is, right? And that becomes challenging from, you know, a chairperson trying to run and orchestrate a meeting in order to be productive. People forget that this conversation is being heard, right? Because that's not their intent, you know. It may be a very private conversation, you know, a very private thing that somebody is trying to tell somebody, you know. Hey, did you know your skirt's up, right? Nobody needs to hear that on a microphone, right? And so you know, but so that's what, you know, trying to be cognizant of what you're trying to capture in that audio is important. And yes, we do think about all these things when we look at these things. Because that's what we do. But anyway, so we are trying to come up with ways, but again, it has to be very user-friendly to the people in the room. We good with info technology?
I'll just say, in Brockton, we had a big program at the school where the kids did everything. And so that might be nice. I don't know if we have anything, but I'm going to talk to some people because,
Okay.
yeah, my sister's husband runs this program at the state college out wherever they are, Fitchburg or whatever.
Okay,
Yeah, because that was nice, and they did all of that. You know, it was they will get credit for it.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, there was a student that was running the camera on the other night at Vitus.
Yes. Yes. Avery did a fantastic job. So we'll move over to Town Hall Building. Town Hall Building, largely our biggest changes are in cleaning supplies, operating supplies. That's really largely around operating supplies, is more along the lines of trash bags and what? It is, these are all price impacts, right? So cleaning supplies have increased, and our operating supplies, meaning paper towels and toilet paper, and, you know, trash bags, those have just increased in cost. And then, so we have an increase of just over 2,000, so 2.9% increase. But largely everything else is remaining pretty much the same. Any questions on Town Hall? Move to Economic Development, 13. This one has a reduction in the budget. So again, salary administrative is the 1 day. She is able to reduce professional development. There is one of the classes she's not going to go to, and one of the conferences that she was slated to go to is actually being paid for by a grant. So we don't need to incorporate that in the budget here. And So there's a reduction on this one. Any questions? Move over to highway supervision. Highway supervision. So really the changes in this, obviously the technical line, that one is due to union contract negotiation or union contract cost. The other lines, adjusting based on either price or historical usage, or what they're, like professional development, it's based on what they're actually going to be able to be attending in the upcoming year. Due to CNR, you actually will see a reduction in the building department budget with this budget. So one of the things that we're doing is a bit of a shift in fleet vehicles. And with that shift comes the shift in where that depreciation needs to be recognized. So we are recognizing higher utilization vehicles should be the newer vehicles, and then when they are replaced, those vehicles shift to lower utilization, right? So that way we are maximizing, and we're not just getting rid of a vehicle that could be used by another department at a lower level, so we're not just buying new vehicles all the time, right? We want to buy a vehicle, use it in that heavier use for its useful period of time on that, and then before we get to pulling out duct tape and all that kind of stuff, we shift it to the lower use, and then we can get an extended use out of that same vehicle versus replacing it every 5 years. Now we can probably actually truly replace the vehicle and get rid of it out of our fleet probably at more closer to a 10-year mark, right? So we can accommodate that. So that's what you're seeing, a shift. You're going to see the shift here, one other department, and then you're going to see savings in the building department because of how we're reshifting those vehicles based on, mileage of use and significance of use. Our highway department, our highway supervision, they plow. Our building officials don't plow, right? A vehicle with a plow on front takes far more abuse than when you shift the plow off of it and you start using it for just running around town for inspections and stuff like that. Very different utilization. So we're going to, really use them more significantly. These vehicles are pickup trucks. And so one of the shifts, and the reason for driving this shift is our deputy fire marshals. Our fire marshal currently is in a pickup truck. Our deputy fire marshals are not in a pickup truck. So that means that any turnout gear that they have is being housed within the vehicle with them. By standards now is you're not supposed to do that. They're being further exposed to potential carcinogens. We need to get them in a pickup truck so that way we can get that out into the pickup bed as opposed to in the vehicle with them. So that's part of the reason why the drive of this shift is to make sure that we're appropriately outfitting the staff with the correct vehicle to be able to perform those duties and perform them safely. So that's highway division, supervision. Any questions?
I have one question on the CNR and shifting around the vehicles. Normally, when we've reached the end of the life of a vehicle, are we trading them in? Are we selling them at auction? By shifting how we're using the utilization of the vehicles, how long we're holding on to them, what kind of an impact would that have at the end of life of the vehicle as far as whether we're trading it in or auctioning it?
Sure, that's a great question. So I will say typically what we have done most recently is that we've done trade-in because that has garnered the best economic value for the vehicles as opposed to auctioning. Auctioning, when we used to do auctioning a number of years ago, well over a decade ago, we were seeing vehicles go for under $500, right? Very nearly not even scrap value is what you were seeing come through on auction value. And so we really moved to and also we had expenses around that as well for an auction, and we were having to hold on to vehicles until you had enough vehicles to actually do an auction, right? So you're holding on to and, trying to jockey around on a very constricted site a bunch of vehicles that you're not able to use anymore, right? So we moved to trading them in. Number one, we usually garner a significantly better value for the vehicle when we're trading in. Number two, we're getting it off our lot. We're removing the insurance exposure around it, and we are removing the, just the cumbersome of it, of having it there. So that's what we've been doing. I will say that I think that it's not going to have a substantial impact in the way that we have developed the transition from heavier utilization. If we were keeping them in that really heavy utilization for a much longer period of time, absolutely. They would be worth substantially less. But by moving them strategically through from a heavy utilization to a lower level utilization, it's going to mean less miles on that vehicle in the tail end of its years. We will likely still retain a good portion. It's not going to be the same, but we will likely be able to retain a good portion of trade-in value on that vehicle when we get ready to go to trade-in.
So you're projecting what we lose in trade-in by going this route and holding the vehicle longer. There'd be more of a cost savings by extending out the CNR
Yes.
and not replacing the vehicle as frequently.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Make sense? Yes, ma'am.
So, like the zoning enforcement officer, the fire marshal, and now the assistants, so those are originally from like plow trucks that you've?
No, so it depends on the fleet vehicle. But the zoning enforcement officer, the building official, assistant building official, those are SUV type vehicles because they aren't plowing. Those are not positions. Those are considered standard fleet vehicles, and that's how we've always replaced those. Those that are pickup trucks, like the what will be the deputy fire marshals, those will come through as either former former plow trucks or our parts vehicle that we have at the highway garage. They very mostly is used for running around and getting parts. Can be activated to use for plowing, not that often. It would be a great vehicle to take one of our main plow pickup trucks, like a supervisor truck, and shift that down eventually to a parts truck, where it may still have some plow utilization, but very minimal, and you're extending the useful life of that. The other ones are SUVs, they're not plows.
So do they really need SUVs, or can they go with a vehicle that isn't as expensive?
We usually get something equivalent to like an Escape. So something that is, it's really not even, I think it's still considered a compact. I don't even know that's considered a mid anymore. But they do have to carry survey equipment. They do have to carry safety equipment. So there is a need to have the ability to carry storage. When we have off-site meetings, those are the vehicles that we pile all of the stuff into to be able to transport. We do want to have a vehicle that has the availability of 4 seats, because when people go to training, a department goes to training, they are required to take a town vehicle. All of them can go together. You're not having 4 vehicles go to a training. You're having 1 vehicle go to the training. So we like to make sure that we can accommodate more than just a driver or 2 people in those vehicles. Also the SUV style vehicle, because it sits a little higher when zoning enforcement or building official are going out onto some of these sites. Some of these sites are still under construction. They have to get through undeveloped driveways and undeveloped, we're going out and looking at open space. They have to be able to get to these locations, and that usually requires a vehicle that sits a bit higher than just a standard smaller car that is going to sit very low. So the average SUV, our average cost for an SUV is about somewhere in the range between $23,000 to $27,000. That's what we've been averaging for the cost for an SUV. So it's not the same as what most people will see out on the market for an SUV. Any other questions? Okay, we will move over to engineering and facilities management. This is the other area that you're seeing an increase in due to CNR. This is because we are looking at outfitting an additional van or truck for our second building maintainer. We now have 2 building maintainers. In order for them to be able to work independently and efficiently cover 6 buildings, it would be great if we don't have them both stuck in one vehicle, but rather they can kind of spread out and get to the different locations and simultaneously work on things at the same time. Punch list gets done a lot quicker when we can get them individually where it's appropriate. There are times when they will have to work together or that they should appropriately work together for safety purposes, but there are plenty of times that one can get to the library and manage light bulb changes and the other one can be here at town hall managing a concern or an issue here. Or be at the community center or wherever, right? Like, this is giving them flexibility to be able to accomplish far more at a given time. All of the other components, labor and technical, those are union-based increases. Everything else is based on projected actual costs or trend.
So what are we looking at, the percentage of the town engineer with the sewer? What is the breakdown between those?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go off the top of my head because I don't have it right in front of me, but the percentage, the town engineer, I believe, is 40% covered by the WPCA, 60% covered by the town. 40? Is it 40-60 for Dave? I'm pretty sure. Or 40s.
Yes, but I think we reduced that slightly this year. I think it's now 30%. I'd have to double check.
35.
Well, just to make a point.
Because,
there is some-
there is, we had increased it almost to 50-50 at one point in time when they were doing the facility upgrade, because Dave was spending a lot more time over there. We've been slowly moving that back to reflect, because now he's overseeing there's a lot of town projects that he's participating in and overseeing, so we constantly are looking at that, but it's right in that range of between 35 and 40% WPCA, the remaining town, as well as the clerical position is now split 50-50. 50% town, 50% WPCA. Any other questions on this one?
Well, that's, again, getting back to why the town budget, but we're getting.
There's an
it's
operating
operate-
revenue.
Yeah, but it shows up that
I know.
expenses are higher.
Yep.
But- Or why is it so high? Maybe that's the bigger question then.
Just so we're going to see the CNR offset, and we'll highlight that.
Yeah, when we get to
Yeah.
building, when we
Okay.
get to the building department. I'm hoping we get, my hope is we get there today. Central garage. Overall, central garage, we have a decrease. So we've already locked in our fuel costs for next year, so we have a decrease in our fuel costs for diesel and gasoline. So we've been able to already build that into the budget, so there's the decrease for that. There's a shift between contractual M&E at 3,000 and, parts and repairs. No. It's contractual M&E and it goes into the highway, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, calcium. No, that's on, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong budget. Never mind. It's contractual services M&E and, that's just an overall decrease. They're not seeing the same level of, having to send things out. And I will say, so for this budget, we are still budgeting for 3 mechanics. This may be an opportunity for the town council in that we still haven't filled that 3rd mechanic. We are looking at doing some conversations around retention of existing and maybe modifying how that structure works. And that may have some provided benefit. I don't have solid concrete information to share on that at this point in time because there is a union conversation that has to take place. But that may be subsequently a area for the council to make decision on. But overall, this budget is reflecting an overall decrease. Largely, our decrease there that's offsetting a lot of this is our electrical. This site does have solar on it, so we are seeing our solar benefit. And heating fuel, and this is the budget that has the diesel, so all 3 of those products are locked in, so we're able to project that new rate. So you're seeing a lot of that savings right here.
So you mentioned the retention of mechanics.
Yes.
Has it anything to do with the facility? Do we need?
No, it has nothing to do with the facility.
Okay, I'm just saying.
I will
because
tell you
it's-
that much right now, has nothing to do with the facility.
Private sector pay.
Correct. So it's a negotiation item, which would not be facility.
So is there any way that you can give us the actual decrease in the utilities costs for the solar?
So we'll look at I'll see what we can do to get you that information. Any other questions on central garage?
I have one. So I just want to clarify, Mary, so the salaries that we see here are 3 mechanics and 1 laborer. Is that how that breaks down?
Yeah, you're seeing 3 mechanics and 1 inventory aide. Mm-hmm.
I do have one question. You had mentioned a vehicle to run around and grab parts. How many vendors do you use that deliver parts, and are we?
We have the
taking-
vast majority deliver parts.
Okay.
That's why I say the parts inventory truck is not used very frequently, but there are some times when they do get parts from O'Reilly's or Napa or something like that. It's not as frequent because we have an inventory system,
Yeah.
and so they monitor that inventory system. But should the price, and Napa will deliver, but should the price of it be more conducive in a more local location, we will take advantage of that. So they do monitor that, but we do get a large amount of them are actually delivered to us. And there are times when we have to bring a component somewhere to be dropped off, to not incur delivery fees or, shipping fees. So we will do that with the vehicle. So again, much lower utilization, but still utilization.
Did we lose the feed that the TVs went by?
Might have just gone to sleep because Andy hasn't been on.
Okay.
Nobody's on it, so it goes to sleep. Well, yeah.
So
That
for the
kind.
labor, because you have the 3 mechanics and then the 1 inventory aide, do you have the actual salary of the 1 mechanic position that isn't filled?
Yeah, I can provide that. I don't have it off the top of my head. I can provide that to you.
I remember this was a big thing last year because we were thinking about it. These contractual services, the 20,000 and the 50,000, do we know how much of that has to do with having to contract anything out because we're short a mechanic, or?
So I will say at this point in time, we have not experienced that. The 2 mechanics that we have been able to pretty much maintain the same level of work that they were doing in-house. I will go back with Matt and see if there's anything that he can bring to mind that if we had a 3rd mechanic, that would have been able to be done in-house, but nothing that is recalling to my mind, which is why we are taking the approach that we're taking as far as looking at whether or not we need to do a better job of retaining the 2 that we have, and maybe take a savings and rework this, right? But again, because it's requiring a union negotiation, I can't really do deep dive. Does that make sense?
Per the union, you're not required to do a 3rd one. You're just
Correct.
required the labor. Let me ask you too, this is probably a dumb question, but what is an example of contractual services and M&E in that department?
Contractual services M&E in that department would be if they had a fuel pump that needed to get rebuilt or something like that. Maybe not a fuel pump, maybe it's a
Hydraulic pump for.
hydraulic pump, right? And they decide that they're going to send that out. That's contractual services M&E.
I would be curious to know how much of what we're outsourcing for repairs is based on shortage of available labor, or as opposed to like something specialized where it's rebuilding a pump, rebuilding a
Right.
transmission.
I think the vast majority is that's what we're doing versus unavailable labor.
Because you start getting into heavy equipment and you get into internals in the transmission, and there's even in not the regular conventional standard size equipment, the amount of specialty tools that are involved. Some of the times, it's more efficient to sub the job out rather than expend all the, sometimes thousands of dollars on equipment just to do a job once that you may not do again for 3 or 4 years. That's what service manuals are for.
Okay. Any other questions on central garage? Seeing none, we're gonna go over to the highway department. Highway maintenance. So here's another opportunity for the town council, with regards to potential savings within the operating budget. So the, change in, wages is contractual. I'm gonna focus on overtime. So you'll note that the very next budget, budget number 29, has always historically been called highway winter maintenance. And what we have done with highway winter maintenance is it only counts as winter maintenance if it's freezing, right? So ice removal, snow removal, sleet removal, right? Having to sand or salt because of icing conditions. So storms only count for winter maintenance if it is actually freezing. Our storms have been wild, just wild, right? And historically, 15 years ago, what we used to see was that we would have in the operating budget in this highway maintenance budget, we would see the occasional summer windstorm, right? Where they had to go out and there was a tree that got down somewhere and they had to go chop it up in the middle of the night and they got it off the road and we were done, right? That's what we used to see. So we had very minimal overtime. So you can see over the years, and if I go back a number of years, you would see that overtime in the highway maintenance budget was even lower than this, right? And so my proposal to the council really is to, instead of calling department number 29 highway winter maintenance, call it storm maintenance, right? We can't control the weather. It's really about whether or not it's a weather event. If that is acceptable to the council in really recognizing that account as storm maintenance, which means that it covers all weather-related response, then I would recommend to the council that we reduce overtime here in the highway maintenance budget to only reflect when they actually are doing overtime related to construction projects and highway maintenance, which would be if they're paving and they need to spend an extra 2 hours to button up the job, and that's 2 hours of overtime. Or they need to do the job on a Saturday because of whatever, traffic, or because that's when the parking lot's available, right? That's what I would recommend that we do here. So I would recommend that you would reduce this budget by $9,000. But I would not recommend increasing highway storm maintenance overtime because I think there is sufficient in there for storm maintenance. For the current year, from July 1st until now, the town has expended in totality, including winter and all storm-related response, we will have expended just about 15, a little over 15,000 in overtime for all storm-related expense, right? All storm-related overtime, all of them. So that's why I'm saying the 115,000 in winter in that is in the storm maintenance in the 29 budget, I think is fine, can remain, may even be able to be decreased because we now also have what I would also recommend the name change to the reserve fund instead of winter maintenance reserve, call it storm maintenance reserve. And that's not on here. That's the reserve account that we've been funding, which is why we've been decreasing the amount of salt in that budget or the salt expense on an annual basis because number one, we've had full salt reserves, but number two, we now have a reserve fund. Should we have an abnormal winter, we have somewhere to go for that expenditure. So that I think is an opportunity by the town council to reduce this budget from on an overtime perspective if you recognize Department 29 as storm maintenance.
What was the actual overtime for Department 28?
For
If you do it the other way?
for Department 28, instead of going 13,000 for a budget, I would decrease it by 9,000, so you would have about 4,000 in overtime, which I think is sufficient, and we would be able to monitor that specifically to construction project. Make sense?
Because it's being covered.
Yes.
Overtime in the highway storm.
Highway storm maintenance. Yeah. As long as we classify, as long as the council agrees to recognize that as storm maintenance as opposed to just winter, right? Trees like to come down all the time on us
More and more.
at the most inopportune times.
Like during a council meeting when it rips the power lines off your house.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you leave here and get home and have nothing.
Or in the middle of the summertime, right? On a clear Sunday, right? And you end up having to deal with it. So that is kind of more of a policy, a little bit of a policy shift. It's not a huge shift, but just something to consider as we've grown on this. Some of the other changes in this, you're seeing, this is where I was thinking, the contractual services support, you're seeing a decrease in that of 5,500, and you're seeing an increase in calcium. The current year, we don't have any calcium in there. We're going to take that back in-house. We've been looking at contracting out the application to our dirt roads, the dust control for our dirt roads. Matt is very confident that we can do that in-house for less money. We've tried it. We can do it, and we are far more flexible on when we can apply that dust control than when we're contracting out. So it's really shifting it from that contractual services back to us doing it ourselves and saving a little bit of money. The equipment, non-vehicular, the request there is for the 60,000. They want to retool a utility truck that was previously the WPCA. So this is an existing vehicle that the town owns. It's on the WPCA side. To be able to utilize it for highway and also parks, really. It can be utilized for parks too with having the boom. Town events, it could get used. So that's really the request, is to invest the 60,000 in that vehicle. The vehicle is in really good shape, so we don't foresee that it's like we're going to make this investment in 2 years, we're going to have to get rid of it. That's not the case on this. So that's the ask on that. But you're seeing a decrease in due to CNR on this because, and I wish Ed was in the room, the NIPS fund. Right, so when we get to the NIPS fund, you're going to see the money from this shift into the NIPS fund because we are receiving. Oh, good, he's back. So Ed, due to CNR on the highway maintenance one, that decrease is due to the NIPS fund.
Oh, okay.
The sweeper, right? So because the NIPS funding, the money that we are getting from that bottle return that's coming to the town, is restricted in use. It is in a restricted fund, but it can be used. It's required to be used for solid waste management, and as much as you can, specifically targeting this type of waste collection. So sweepers are an eligible expenditure out of that fund. So we shifted the depreciation from the sweeper from here to that NIPS fund. So it's no longer going to be paid for by the general fund. It's now going to be paid by that separate revenue source that is restricted, and we will then be able to pay the CNR depreciation value to replace those sweepers as we go forward. So that is something that kind of shifts. So overall, there's an increase of 35,000 on this budget. But again, there's some shifting that's taking place here. And there is the potential reduction of additional 9,000 should the council agree with storm maintenance as opposed to just winter maintenance. They are very specific with the payroll side on did it have actual winter implication? Because if it was not winter, it does not go to winter maintenance. You cannot code it there, so.
I do have one question on the vehicle that you're going to be repurposing, retooling. What exactly is the changes that we're doing for $60,000? Because I saw something in there where it talked about retooling of a boom truck from a utility truck. Now, are we taking a truck and putting a boom on it,
No.
or are they taking
It-
a boom off?
It has a boom or a crane type thing, so they have to like make it so like it has enough reach. I don't know if they're actually putting a bucket on it. I can't specifically remember. But they're making it so it has a further application to what it can do now. But the truck can handle it versus trying to get a whole new utility vehicle to do.
I'm gonna text Matt and ask him to give me an explanation, again, more detailed, because
Okay,
for
'cause-
whatever, for the life of me, I'm not remembering exactly, so.
Because considering $60,000, that would have to, being in the industry, that would definitely be a substantial amount of work. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're putting a boom on a truck that doesn't have a boom at all, I can understand
Maybe it has
that,
the
but-
crane lift on it now and they're putting the boom on
Yeah,
it.
I don't think it has a boom on it. I
It
think
made
they're
sense
putting
when he
one
was
on it.
explaining it, but now that you're asking, I can't relay it back.
Okay,
Which we should be able to, and I apologize for that.
it's all right.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, like, how much would
Oh,
we
maybe,
need
yeah.
that? If we didn't have that, you know what I mean? If we didn't have that boom
Hang on.
Yeah.
use before.
Yeah, and depending on the size of the vehicle, would it be worth just trading the vehicle and buying a vehicle that already is equipped?
Matt looked at that, and he felt that this was definitely a way better investment.
Considering that WPCA had to spend it was well over $100,000 to do what they needed to do to get what they needed. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can retrofit it today, it's much more cost effective than buying
Highway, Public Works, 22, 24, 28. So they are adding a 30-foot to 35-foot bucket to an old WPCA crane truck. So they're adding, that's all the hydraulics, right? So that's what they're adding. I'm going off of the decision package that Matt filled out for us. And that would be able to be used by Parks and Recreation to be able to do the Christmas lights, any of their small tree trimming. Building maintenance can use it for checking our cameras, lights, gutters, things like that, because it's not, the truck itself is not large enough to require a CDL. And Highway can use it as an additional tree crew to do just low-hanging stuff.
Do you know if he considered looking into other utility, like utility companies' vehicles that are going up for auction, if it's something we're not using often? I know granted, this is going back about 7-8 years ago, my employer purchased a bucket truck from Groton Utilities, and it was low mileage, it was a little older, and that had a 45-foot boom, and I think he paid $18,000 for the truck.
So I will say, historically, the town has at times looked at auction vehicles from other municipalities for use. Our experience has been the other municipality is getting rid of it for a reason. And we have dumped a substantial amount into those vehicles in order to keep them running or keep them functioning. I'm actually, so, that being said, Matt is always willing to look at used vehicles if it makes sense, especially for a lower utilized vehicle. It appears in this case that it is more cost effective knowing the history of the vehicle that we have, the quality of the vehicle that we have.
Yeah.
He is not going to recommend that we expend this level of funding, $60,000, to add a bucket to an older vehicle that is a pain vehicle for them to maintain right now. You know, he's going to look at another alternative. So, you know, I'm pretty confident that the vehicle that we're putting it on is a sound vehicle. And, you know, when you buy something off of auction, you know, roll the dice. You have no idea what you're getting.
Yeah, true.
In our experience, I will say, you know, I can name off a few vehicles that we got that they attempted to do something like that on, and we spent hand over fist on it. We would have been better off buying brand new by the time we were done. So, again, most of the time, by the time municipalities are moving those vehicles into an auction state, they're a little past serviceable life for our utilization, especially since this isn't just going to be used by the highway garage on a one-off to go and do, just a few low tree limbs. I mean, you're talking Parks is going to use it, Building's going to use it. It's going to be used pretty regularly throughout all of the departments that could use it. It's just, it allows it to be multi-use for all the departments.
Yeah, I guess that would be my question to Jason's thing. Do we really need another bucket truck? That would be my question. Sounds like we do. Yeah, okay.
We do. We do. We are fortunate that we have the capacity staff-wise to be able to do the amount of tree work that we do. We could probably send. This is Matt going. I now asked him a question, so now I'm getting dissertations.
And he probably turned on heat.
Okay, so here we go. So there are some on sale, but at the same time, this one also has a crane, which they can use as well as the bucket. It has really low miles on it. It's like 25,000 miles, and it's in 2005, and they have all the maintenance history on it because they've worked on it. They know it. He's always willing to look at another vehicle, but they would have to recertify everything on a vehicle that we were acquiring. So that's basically what he's giving me for information. I will say, as far as demand and use, right? Right now, especially the timings of the year in which Parks is looking to get the Christmas lights up, and Parks is looking at doing some of their maintenance in the parks for trees. It's usually about the same time that Highway's trying to get out and get some major tree work done along some of the roadways. We're running into that fall time frame. Leaves are coming off. That's an opportune time to get trees down, or early spring before leaves get on. That's when you're really opportune time to look at getting dealing with those trees before leaves are really there. So there's a bit of competing need at that point in time, as well as in general that then really cuts out our building maintenance department from being able to have access to that type of equipment. So we end up having to rent for them to be able to get that.
That was my next question, like how much do we sub out?
We really don't actually sub out much for trees at all. No, at one point in time, we were really doing a fair amount of subbing out for trees, but I would say in the last 6 to 8 years in hiring practices, they have really looked at tree history, tree experience, and kind of added that as a priority. It's really saved money to the town overall. What used to be a $10,000 tree to come down, it's the highway crew taking it down. They are incredibly professional and knowledgeable about trees. We've also invested in having several of them be certified tree wardens. So you're not always having to wait for one person to show up and look at a tree to determine whether or not, yes, it meets the criteria to get it down. We have multiple that can go out and take a look. And they're assigned to a crew, so they are actively involved in that tree removal. I think we've actually benefited, the townspeople have benefited enormously from that, because a lot of windstorms that we've had recently, our neighboring towns have had significant power outages. We haven't had nearly as much in power outages. And that is, while Eversource is doing tree removal, there's a lot of trees that can impact the power lines that are not considered Eversource trees because they are outside of that span, but they are town trees, right? And because we are proactively dealing with them, taking down those dead ones, proactively responding to those, we're not having as many crossover and then take out power lines. So we have had far less impact on our roadways and to our residents for power outages because of the level of tree crews that we have and the equipment and the maintenance that we've been doing.
Getting back to the MIP fund and the sweeper, I missed a little bit, but how, the MIP fund's only been in operation, 1 year, or what?
About a year. We'll go over that whole fund when we get into the F pages. We have what we currently have been receiving for revenue, and then the projection of what we're getting now that it's gone from 5 cents to 10 cents. But that revenue.
That's why I said it's a moving target.
It is, but that revenue. So first of all, it's been a little over a year that we've had the revenue coming in. So we have some trend history. I wouldn't be recommending this if we didn't have trend history. So we know pretty stably what we're getting on a quarterly basis on that. And now that it's gone from 5 cents to 10 cents, it's based on the sale of NIPS that occur within your municipality. And so we know, that hasn't changed. That's been pretty steady. So we can project that now forward. So this is not our first year of doing that. And when we get to the F pages, when we get to that fund, you'll be able to see that.
No, I don't want them in my yard. See, we're getting the money, but I still have to pick them up, and now I have to dispose of them, so.
I know, right?
Try living
It's
on the road where the
bad.
industrial park is.
It's bad. So, so that's highway maintenance. Does anybody have any other questions on highway maintenance?
I just wanted to make one comment. I know you had mentioned the vehicle's only got 25,000 miles on it, which I think is great. But considering the age of the vehicle, the fact it's 19, almost 20 years old, my concern would be what kind of condition is the frame in, what kind of condition is the body in, how well have they inspected the underside of this thing? Because if you go throwing a boom on a truck, you're dumping $60,000 into a truck, and you've got spots in the frame where aren't always visible. I experienced this recently, and Mr. Catula can attest to this, where you've got a spot in the frame where it isn't visible until you pull a gas tank down and you realize the cross member for the gas tank is pretty much gone. So there's a lot of things that can be hidden where you've got rust spots, and we could be dumping good money into a bad truck without doing a full inspection.
Yeah, and I will say that our head mechanic is very, he does heavy equipment, so he's very cautious around what the recommendation would be to further outfit a vehicle. So, I'm pretty confident that he's done a very thorough look to the best, obviously, of his, abilities without literally stripping the vehicle down, right? I mean, nobody's going to completely strip a vehicle, but at the same time, so they're making that recommendation that this is a sound vehicle for us to be able to invest in. Chances are good if we were to buy another utility vehicle out of auction, it would be about the same vintage. It's not going to be much different, and we won't know any historical information on it. So this is a pretty sound vehicle that they're looking to make that investment in.
How about, like, we're doing a lot of right-of-way maintenance for the sewer lines, and we've geared some of our little skid steers or whatever, different attachments to that regard.
Well,
we have
that's-
a deal with.
That's, the equipment that we've purchased has been to be able to be used townwide, not just for one
Well, no,
specific
I-
application or purpose. So, the WPCA, purchases any, specific equipment to their needs. But, the highway department, we also are maintaining our own drainage easements and, many other areas throughout town. So there's no specific equipment that's purchased strictly for the WPCA.
Well, but we are doing quite a bit of their right-of-way. We're
Sure.
taking that on where,
Sure. We're also not paying for a truck. You know what I mean? So there is, this is collectively the town.
oh, no, that's
You know what I
right,
mean?
right,
And
right.
there's got to be some level of cooperative effort and work that we work together on. So the next page is storm maintenance. I think we've kind of reviewed that one. Again, if you guys are concurring to call it storm maintenance versus winter maintenance, then we would really look to essentially leave everything fairly close to the same as far as salt and calcium. You can see where, Matt did make the request for a higher salt and calcium, and that's really just to keep an eye on that's what, a potential year may look like. But we are going into this upcoming year with, a full salt load. So again, I don't believe that we need to increase the operating. We have a well-funded reserve fund for maintenance as well for this response. So I think that we would be in a good position to keep that flat. So this is a flat budget.
So for clarification purposes, you said that all overtime related to storms was 15,000, and we have budgeted 115,000 for overtime?
For the current year. That's not necessarily the amount of overtime that we've spent in previous years. That's currently, this year we've had a very light winter. We haven't had much in the way for winter response. And we've been fortunate in many of the windstorms that we haven't had significant tree down and having to respond to that. We've had a few, so we have had some response on that. I would, caution on reducing that number substantially because, one tropical storm can have you out for 4 days.
I thought she said 113.
No,
Did you say 15?
We've
Oh.
only expended, from what Matt gave me for calculations, it's right here.
I was just gonna pull up my current, finance report
So that's just the overtime number. How much? Oh, ha ha ha. That's his right here, right? That's what he gave me. That's not it? I know, and I converted it using an approximation.
But you would have to allocate, Ula.
I'll have Jen verify the numbers.
You would have to allocate the 9K from this page to that 15, really, to make it accurate.
Well,
What
I
she's
would-
talking about, accurate
yeah,
estimate.
yeah. Yep, I get it. I'm gonna have Jen double check the numbers. We can come back to that one. I don't want to hold up while you go through the thing. We really haven't had a huge amount of overtime, and a lot of the storms that we've had this year has been during the day.
Right.
So that's another thing, you never know when you get, we've had years that it seemed like every storm was on a Saturday and Sunday.
Yes, yes.
It's all
yes.
overtime and double time, right?
Or Christmas.
Right, or it's all at night, right? And we've had Christmas and Thanksgiving storms. Those are all, double time, right? So, again, this is that safety net of what's our storm going in, the council can make decisions around that and change that numbers. It's just, my recommendation is that it remains the same as you go through, especially since this will now quantify all storm-related response, right? And we have, so that's just the recommendation. The council, that's why you guys deliberate on this and you change it to the town council.
I think it would be good, Mary, to have a narrative with just these 2 pages for the town meeting too, so they understand what's happening.
Sure.
And an actual. I mean, it sounds
Yep.
like we're going to have the actual anyway, but
Well, you all have the actuals in your finance report.
That's okay. But,
for the town and everything,
yeah.
they can see
Yep,
it.
we'll put that in.
Another thing that I would, because Michelle was bringing that up, is also to have a list of the areas that we have no choice in, that they're based on per capita, such as the NECOG, the United Services.
Oh, that's
Youth-
human services.
But also there's the
Which budget?
the probate expenses that the town incurs that they don't have any choice of the increase.
Okay.
So.
I mean, I could also put in utilities.
No, I'm talking about what we're obligated to. So we brought up before that, the town's budget went up by this amount, but it went up by this amount because we have to pay the NECOG. We have to pay
Okay.
the probate.
Yeah, like those.
Right.
What's wrong with this thing? Those,
In a sense, like mandated costs.
thank
Yeah,
you, Jason.
mandated. That we can't just based on per capita mandated costs that we,
Okay. I will pull something together for that, for the meeting.
Thank you.
Sure.
where the increase comes from, that it's not.
Your mic.
Where the increases come from that we have no choice over.
Sure.
Just like pay increases are negotiated, union negotiations.
Yep. Okay.
Your year-to-date on the, storm for
For storm?
personnel costs is 66,175.
That's the overtime.
That's, yeah, well, yeah, everything in that budget is overtime.
But then we would add the 13, the 9,000 from the other budget to that.
Yeah, so
Yep.
there's more than, yeah.
I was only talking about what was in that other budget for storm. Okay, thank you, Jen. We good with storm maintenance? Go to recreation? So recreation budget, if you look at the very kind of top part of the block of the numbers, that really talks about the total expenditures, which are reflected at the total bottom, on the bottom of that page. It reflects the amount of revenue that we saw in the C pages associated to recreation. So that's the revenue programs, and we're anticipating an increase in that. And then also the revenues associated from the cannabis local share. So the net tax impact for this budget for the upcoming year is actually a decrease, while the expenditures are an increase. You have to directly look at what revenue it's generating as well. So on the personnel side, you're seeing an increase in seasonal staff. There's two components to that. One of those components is due to minimum wage. Another component is a stipend for the municipal agent for the elderly. The town is required to have a designated municipal agent for the elderly. We currently don't have that designation. Formerly, it had been the director of the QV Senior Center.
Can we have that breakdown, Mary? Like, how much is that?
10,000.
Okay.
10,400 for the municipal agent for the elderly. And then the other portion for the increase for 10,000. Oh, yeah. So 10,000 is that the portion with regards to minimum wage, and there's some additional programs for summer camp and for athletic programs that have offsetting revenues. That's your increase in revenues. So 21,000 of that increase is made up from minimum wage impact, and also for programs that have offsetting revenues. The technical line is contractual based. That's a union contract. Overtime, we have a lot more programs that are occurring on weekends, nights. That's the availability of the community. We want to make sure that we have appropriate staff for that. And so that has required additional overtime per union contract. The other areas, advertising is increasing. They are going to try and utilize the digital sign that's on the highway as well to help try and offset some of those costs, because the town is able to advertise on that for free. So they are looking to try and utilize that. But again, not everybody drives 395 southbound, or will drive by 395 southbound when it's up. Because there are a number of things that are digitally being displayed on there.
Or when the sign's actually working.
Right. So we will have costs, and those advertising costs have increased, and we want to make sure that we get the word out. Contractual services support. This is again related to programs. They're looking at doing some additional senior trips, and that usually is offset by revenues for those things. So those are kind of directly tied together. Other just minor modifications in office supplies and operations for a total budget. So while again the expenditure line has an increase of 10%, the overall budget mill rate impact is actually a decrease of 7.7% decrease.
I have one question, and I might have missed it. On the revenue portion where it's got revenue cannabis local share, we've been receiving that money. I know we just got
We just started receiving that
Okay.
money, so we only have a couple of quarters in place at this point in time. So we're very conservative on what we're estimating for that revenue for next year, just because it's based on sales. And, you know, I don't know what that flow looks like at this point in time. Yeah, so I don't want to overestimate that revenue and then find it comes in very short.
But I was looking at the historic trend, like it showed 2019 to 2020. It actually
Oh.
showed an amount.
It should have gone up. Those,
yeah, I'll fix that.
those prior years, the 2023, 2022, those are actually revenues for the program, not cannabis.
Okay.
Wrong line, so I apologize. See,
Okay.
and I will say, we review this thing like you would not believe.
I actually had an independent.
We had-
person,
right.
like, spend a lot of time.
We
like,
did.
Never get them all.
Never.
It kills me though when we get in this and it's like, oh, how did we miss
I
that?
have no idea how
It's
much
like when they
drives
update a
me.
computer program. God. You update and then you have 20 bugs from the update
Yeah.
that you have to fix.
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah.
So thank you
So-
for pointing that
So
out.
those two lines are flip-flop then? They're just
Yes.
identified wrong? Okay.
Flip.
I borrowed the line, so I didn't have to change.
'Cause
the
clearly we-
lines, and then
We didn't have cannabis revenue prior to this year.
That's what I'm looking at. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm like.
We did not, so
Okay.
that would be why.
So
Okay.
far, we've been receiving kind of like more like $8,000, but there's been so far we've been receiving closer to like $8,000 a month since October, but there's been a couple months where it's been more like 5,000, so I've taken like the $5,000 a month as like the low, but there's really no
Being
way. to-
Until we
Conservative,
really
yeah.
get a trend, I think it's kind of hard, so we want to be conservative on that.
I've got a question. So there's a couple new positions, and they're being offset by the, I almost said weed, by the cannabis. If we didn't use the cannabis for the new positions, we can use it for something else in this budget. Is that correct?
You really can only use it for arts and culture. So that's where the theater program is in
But
here.
it could, if it could pay for an existing summer staff position. Is that correct?
Yes, it
Okay.
could be utilized.
Just so
The
I
only
understand what
addition, so I
utilized.
will say the only addition to this budget that is actually being offset by the cannabis is the cost for the municipal agent for the elderly position, the stipend. That's the only one that is actually being truly covered by that. The other positions that are in here, the athletic clinics, those are offset by revenue. You notice that the program revenue is going from 145 to 165.
Yeah.
So their costs are being offset by that additional revenue. Those
No, but when I asked for the breakdown, and this is not, I'm just trying to understand, Mary.
Sure.
It was 10,000 for the elderly, some of it was the minimum wage, and then out of this $32,000, 32,273, there was also additional staff, summer staff, seasonal staff, that was being offset by the revenue. So,
No, so I apologize. Maybe I didn't clearly state that. So there's not new camp staff, right? There's not any new camp staff. The new athletic camps, which have a staff person to them, they're minimal numbers. Those are in the seasonal, but those have offsetting program revenue that offsets that cost. So that's program revenue. But they are part of that $32,000, right? So 21,000 of that 32,000 is those few additional seasonal staff for camp programs, but a large portion of it is minimum wage impact for our seasonal camp staff because they're going to go up. We hire most of them at minimum wage, and they're going to go up.
so the additional costs might be a wash because the program's bringing in money.
Correct.
We didn't have that program.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so the only thing that really doesn't have its own offsetting revenue is the municipal agent for the elderly. And that is a stipend position. So that position is required to assist the community, our senior residents with referrals. So when a senior is like how do I figure out this Social Security thing? How do I figure out this Medicare thing? How do I, figure out my iPhone? How do I get transportation? This person helps direct them to resources and then follows up with them. Are you receiving those resources? Were you able to get that completed? Do you need help with that application? That type of thing. So we're fortunate that we have a staff member in the recreation department. It's going to be getting ready to retire that has a really great association and link with our seniors right now, is really well attuned to them and is already helping and providing some of that information right now to them. And so we really should be compensating the level of hours that are going to be attributed to that position. We used to compensate a position when they were standalone. And this would be standalone, because we've received a lot of that feedback from our senior members.
Just one last thing on this same topic. So you've got an increase in your revenue program, approximately $20,000. Like, I would be interested in seeing if that is a direct offset, because that's a very convincing then to say, oh, it's that 20,000 is right there.
Sure.
Or is that from other programs? So,
Yeah.
Bucky could.
Yep, I will further outline that. Okay.
So the cost of summer camp totally covers the cost of the,
No, never has. And honestly, I don't know that the town has ever seen that as a goal, because we have, a number of people that utilize this are individuals that they can't afford regular daycare. They can't afford to have their kids in a program like that. The town has taken this as a way of helping to subsidize those individuals that need that assistance during the summer months, for their children to have safe and with some educational and fun components in it, in order for them to be able to still go to work. And so that's what our summer camp program is not 100% funded by camp fees.
It would disenfranchise a lot of families. They want to be able to
It would.
afford to send their kids if it went up.
They likely also wouldn't be able to go to work either, because number one, there's not enough daycare opportunities. And what daycare opportunities there are, they can be very expensive, especially if more than one child. And these are, we accept school-age children, right? So these are children that are literally, they're off for the summer. And, we do it for 6 weeks. So it's not the entire summer, but it takes a good chunk of that summer and gives them really productive activities to participate in for that time period. And it does allow parents to be able to, to continue to work and function.
I'm not against it at all. I'm just trying to figure out the money. But honestly, I don't want my taxpayer money to be used as a daycare. And so I don't have any problem with these programs. I'm not saying I'm going to vote against the programs. I think they're good. But just the concept that you just said, that's not my responsibility.
Would you rather have the mom on welfare because she can't go to work?
Then take my
And then
taxes, you
pay-
do
then
whatever
you'd
you
be
have to
paying a
do.
lot
Correct, I
more.
am not a daycare.
You'd be paying a
My
lot more.
tax money is not to be used as a daycare center.
Any other questions on recreation as we continue through? Okay. Do we want to, at some point, break for lunch? I believe lunch is here. What time we're at?
12 o'clock right now.
12 o'clock. Do you want to, you have to actively make a motion to recess?
I will entertain a motion to take recess for lunch.
I'll make that motion.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. My stomach concurs. We're going into recess.